Scalar electromagnetic weapons and their terrorist use. Immediate strategic aspects of the asymmetric war on the U.S. T. E. Bearden. October 13, 2004. Drafted September 11, 2004 on the third anniversary of September 11, 2001. Cold War development of scalar interferometry. Prior to 1990, our weather over North America was being steadily engineered by the KGB. Particularly beginning on July 4, 1976, using giant strategic scalar interferometers on site in Russia. From the beginning of the development program started shortly after World War II, the KGB personally controlled the development of startling new Russian weapons under the Soviet Energetics program. That program was for research and eventual development of highly advanced new superweapons more powerful than the atomic bomb. The new superweapons were developed, produced, manned, and operated by the KGB itself, and were never placed in the hands of the regular Russian armed forces. Speaking to the Presidium in 1960, Khrushchev referred to the forthcoming scalar interferometer weapons with the following statement: "We have a new weapon? Just within the portfolio of our scientists, so to speak. So powerful that, if unrestrainedly used, it could wipe out all life on Earth." The large Soviet strategic scalar interferometers were deployed and became operational in April 1963, a bit too late for Khrushchev to use and counter the U.S. confrontation in the Cuban Missile Crisis of latter 1962. However, the first operational weapon was used to destroy the USS Thresher nuclear submarine underwater and on maneuvers off the east coast of the United States, in April 1963. Thereby Khrushchev demonstrated the power of his new weapons over one of the major three elements of the strategic military nuclear firepower of the United States. Extension to the other two elements, intercontinental ballistic missiles and strategic bombers, was obvious. Incidents where outside intervention saved the United States. Many dramatic but largely unheralded incidents occurred during the so-called Cold War. For example, in the 1970s a small nation saved us from being totally destroyed by Soviet nuclear weapons which had been inserted in our cities. That nation did it very simply: they also inserted an appreciable number of nuclear weapons of their own inside Russia itself, in its population centers and its primary target zones. Some of them were thermonuclear. All these inserted nuclear weapons both in the United States and in Russia are still there with their activation teams, waiting. In such manner was the balance of terror, the mutual assured destruction or MAD doctrine, really implemented and enforced vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. In April 1986 a secretive little U.S. group intervened in a forthcoming giant earthquake being built up by the KGB scalar interferometers for the greater Los Angeles and San Francisco areas. Via a special electronic device, the group suddenly destroyed one of the distant Soviet scalar interferometer transmitters, thereby initiating the nearby Chernobyl nuclear incident but preventing the loss of perhaps 200,000 U.S. lives in Los Angeles and San Francisco, together with terrible destruction and economic damage. Also in 1986, the same friendly little nation again prevented our strategic destruction by even more powerful energetics weapons developed by the Soviet Union. The friendly nation simply began exploding very large Russian missile ammunition storage sites, as a direct warning of what was in store for the Soviet Union if the Soviets attacked. In 1997, again the US would have been utterly destroyed on two occasions had it not been for the same little nation. Several professional colleagues and I played a desperate role in both those incidents. They were frighteningly real but also totally unreported in the news media. Indeed, our own intelligence agencies had no inkling that a full strategic Soviet superweapon attack to destroy the United States was imminent on each of the occasions, the second of which would have occurred on May 1, 1997. The May Day for 1997 would have been the big one, had the FSB KGB not been checkmated by an offer it could not refuse delivered once again by the friendly nation. During those critical periods when every hour on the clock seemed a week in length, the hostile armada that would have struck us included the Japanese Yakuza and Aum Shinrikyo teams on site in Russia, operating leased KGB FSB strategic scalar interferometers against the U.S. Yakuza acquisition of Soviet superweapons. With the collapse of the old Soviet Union's economy, by the end of 1989 the Russian financial situation was grim. By courtesy of the Russian mafia, which works directly for the FSB KGB, a rogue Japanese group consisting of the Yakuza and Aum Shinrikyo was conducted to Russia in latter 1989, met with the KGB, and leased some of those large KGB strategic scalar interferometers on site in Russia. The down payment was $900 million US in gold bullion, and the lease is rumored to be some $1 billion per year. The Yakuza and Aum Shinrikyo then assigned teams to man those superweapon sites and begin weather engineering operations against the United States and other targets. The Aum Shinrikyo even set up a small university in Russia where the energetics theory and technology could be taught to the rogue Japanese teams by the KGB scientists. The rogue Japanese teams underwent extensive training, and in 1990 they began operating these large strategic interferometers worldwide, including performing extensive weather engineering operations, directly under the supervision of the FSB KGB. The use of the Yakuza and its vast resources worldwide was thus incorporated into the FSB KGB planning and coordination for the coming destruction of the United States and the Western world. Much later, Western investigations into the Aum Shinrikyo did clearly establish the sex links in Russia, but missed the major involvement of the Yakuza. The Soviets easily made it appear that contact of the Aum Shinrikyo with Russia had been harmless. Quoting Turbeville, Russian, Japanese, and other investigators quickly identified a substantial number of sect Aum Shinrikyo members in Russia, including members in the government and other walks of life. Media commentators took note of a gas analyzer of Russian origin seized at a sect facility, reports of Aum Shinrikyo sect members among Russian radiation, chemical, and biological defenses troops, alleged sect ties to the Russian Academy of Sciences, the large volume of commercial Russian ship and aircraft traffic between Russia and Japan, and other issues that suggested questionable Russo-Japanese linkages to sarin production or transport. Official Russian military and security service spokesman, while acknowledging Aum Shinrikyo's presence in Russia, reiterated the absolute security of military chemical depots and munitions. So in early 1990, the weather engineering operations over North America were assumed from the FSB KGB by the Yakuza Aum Shinrikyo teams, and operations continued with the Yakuza's leased giant scalar interferometers. The weather engineering against the United States continues today under the rogue Japanese teams on site in Russia, with direct FSB KGB supervision. In 2004 we have entered the 2-year final preparation phase. These operations have been intensified and will continue to be intense, wreaking great economic damage. Hurricanes Charlie, Francis, Ivan, Jean, etc. have been no exception to the Yakuza weather engineering, which included directly influencing and controlling each hurricane's power and behavior, as well as directing its course and speed so as to choose its targeting path. Indeed, Ivan did a 180-degree turn, and Jean did a 360-degree loop before reaching Florida, demonstrating the degree of control available. Meteorologists do recognize periods of increased or decreased hurricane activity for various reasons, but they do not consider deliberate human induction of hurricanes or human control over their direction, power, and progress. Indeed, in latter March of 2004, Hurricane Catarina, the first ever recorded hurricane in the South Atlantic, formed and came ashore in Brazil on March 28 with 90 miles per hour winds, doing substantial damage. So while the conventional wisdom is that hurricanes cannot form, naturally, in the South Atlantic, this one did and broke all the records. It appears to have been a deliberate probe by the Yakuza, produce and drive ashore a hurricane where the textbooks state one is impossible, to test whether Western governments and scientists recognize the artificial weather engineering. The answer, of course, is that as expected the West did not recognize its importance, or that it was a deliberate stimulus. Western meteorologists and governments simply shrugged off Hurricane Catarina as an interesting little phenomenon but of no great concern. After leasing the KGB FSB scalar interferometers on site in Russia at the end of 1989, the Yakuza later carried the scalar electromagnetics, energetics, technology and science for such interferometry back to Japan. There they set up their own clandestine facilities to manufacture such weapons, including small portable scalar interferometers, electromagnetic pulse weapons, and possibly even negative energy electromagnetic pulse weapons. Selected portable weapons of such types are to be inserted. Probably some have already been inserted into the US and used internally by the Yakuza in its coming destruction of our centralized electrical power system. With the final coup de grace to be delivered about 2 years from now, the loss of our national electrical power system is intended to evoke the catastrophic collapse of the entire US economy, followed by the fall of other Western nations' economies like toppling dominoes. The problem is this: the US government, scientific community, intelligence community, and electrical power industry seem totally incapable of confronting the desperate requirement to replace our entire centralized electrical power system with fuel-free self-powering energy from the vacuum, EFTV, systems, as rapidly as is humanly possible. Mere mention of such a requirement engenders psychological displacement activity and denial. Hence the US continues its energy business as usual, while the clock ticks away to our destruction. Our desperate need to correct the seriously flawed classical electromagnetics, CEM, and electrical engineering, EE, models. In the past we have used the phrase scalar electromagnetics and scalar interferometry to describe the longitudinal electromagnetic wave transmitters used in these interferometer weapons. Tesla did not originate the term, nor did he originate scalar interferometry, although he had indeed stumbled onto longitudinal electromagnetic waves and what can only be called force-free precursor engineering. Quoting Tesla, "I showed that the universal medium is a gaseous body in which only longitudinal pulses can be propagated, involving alternating compressions and expansions similar to those produced by sound waves in the air. Thus, a wireless transmitter does not emit Hertz waves, which are a myth, but sound waves in the ether, behaving in every respect like those in the air, except that, owing to the great elastic force and extremely small density of the medium, their speed is that of light. If one replaces the words gaseous body with the modern term virtual particle flux, active virtual state gas, of the vacuum, one sees Tesla's words in agreement with the basic view of the modern active vacuum. Discovery of electromagnetic longitudinal waves, which actually comprise all normal electromagnetic waves, fields, and potentials, leads to a much more fundamental electrodynamics, including sophisticated altering of ordinary electromagnetic waves, potentials, and fields to contain hidden internal Whittaker field vectors and their dynamics. The energy density of the vacuum energy comprises an enormously powerful scalar potential of the vacuum spacetime. As such, this potential, that is, the vacuum energy flux and Einstein's force space itself, decomposes into Whittaker harmonic sets of bidirectional electromagnetic longitudinal phase conjugate wave pairs. The Western classical force field electrodynamics is a lower group symmetry electrodynamics. That is, U1, symmetry electromagnetic, which in turn is totally engineerable from its very beginning and from its inside out, by an electromagnetic of sufficiently higher group symmetry. Our scientists, engineers, and thermodynamicists have largely failed to grasp the implications of the gauge freedom axiom once asymmetrical Riga-Eugene is used rather than symmetrical Riga-Eugene. The first requirement for energy from the vacuum systems producing more energy output than the operator alone inputs, is to violate the invariance of the theoretical equations and thus break Lorentz symmetry as well. Further, when one deals with the force-free electromagnetic field, potential, and wave as it exists in mass-free space, one does not have to pay to furnish the energy necessary to develop powerful working forces a priori. Instead, one only has to deliberately direct nature's own energy flows, exhibited by the internal Whittaker composition of any electromagnetic static potential, field, or wave in space. Force is an ongoing effect of a more primary ongoing interaction, not a fundamental cause. By asymmetrically directing the free Whittaker electromagnetic energy flows from almost freely established static fields and potentials, forces in charged matter can in theory be generated to almost any strength and in any pattern set, including with a chosen internal dynamics. This is the ultimate far from equilibrium thermodynamics approach. In such manner, one uses negative entropy engineering, in total violation of the present flawed second law of thermodynamics. There are no integrated, observable, forces in space, since force and force fields exist only in matter. Our fundamental mechanics greatly errs in assuming a separate force in mass-free space, acting upon a separate mass. No such separate force in mass-free space exists, or can exist, since mass is a component of force by force equals change of momentum. No mass, no force. As Nobelist Feynman stated, everything we know is only some kind of approximation, therefore, things must be learned only to be unlearned again or, more likely, corrected. Speaking about force, Feynman stated, in dealing with force the tacit assumption is always made that the force is equal to zero unless some physical body is present. One of the most important characteristics of force is that it has a material origin. If you insist on a precise definition of force, you will never get it. So then what kind of electromagnetics exists in force-free space, prior to the presence of mass and thus prior to the formation of forces and force fields assumed by the present conventional electromagnetic electrical engineering? Speaking of the electric field in space from a source positive charge, and the responses of charged masses placed in that field and interacting with it, Feynman stated, the existence of the positive charge, in some sense, distorts, or creates a condition in space, so that when we put the negative charge in, it feels a force. This potentiality for producing a force is called an electric field. What basically exists in mass-free, non-integrated, space-time is the disintegrated and disordered virtual particle flux, VPF, of the vacuum. All the energy is virtual state energy, and we may state that the basic enormous vacuum energy, if it were coherently integrated, is disintegrated into very tiny virtual bits of energy. An electromagnetic field, or potential, or wave in vacuum, in empty space, is actually an organization, ordering, and dynamics imposed upon and in the basic disordered virtual particle flux and virtual energy. The fundamental field or potential is thus an organizing pattern and must already include negative entropy, to reorder the disordered virtual energy of the vacuum, a priori. Any persisting pattern, electromagnetic change, organization, in a region of the virtual particle flux, once it interacts with observable charged matter can be and is integrated to observable, quantum, level, producing force and force fields in the interacting charged matter. There is no observable force a priori until a pattern of virtual change in a region of the vacuum is reacting with observable matter and being integrated to observable quantum level in that interaction. We have explained that integration process elsewhere, as demonstrated by every charge in the universe. How the notion of transverse electromagnetic waves in space originated. To explain longitudinal electromagnetic waves in the vacuum, and also to explain their detection as transverse waves in a receiving conductor, one merely points out the known severe longitudinal flow restraint on the Drude electrons in a conductor. While the electrons in the Drude gas may individually move at greater velocity, their net flow longitudinally down the conductor is the drift velocity, and it is usually on the order of a few centimeters per second in a typical bench circuit with small voltages and currents. The electron longitudinal velocity down the conductor is very much less than the speed of the field or potential down the wire. Hence there exists a very effective gyroscopic restraint of the electron's spinning gyro axis in the longitudinal or current flow direction. The Drude electrons, due to their continuous spin, act as gyros with longitudinally restrained axes. When the longitudinal electromagnetic force kindles, integrates, upon them from the vacuum precursor, force-free, field interaction. The longitudinally restrained Drude electron occasionally slips a bit longitudinally, but it is immensely freer to move transversely. So it easily precesses laterally, and the lateral motions can be very large and / or very fast indeed. The intense lateral precession of the Drude electron as a gyro quite well demonstrates the longitudinal nature of the causative disturbing precursor agent, with the longitudinal impulse force strongly resisted by the longitudinal restraint force, and with most of the electron's effect force being the resulting gyroelectron precession force at right angles. Even for electrons in empty space, their inertia together with their spin results in a similar much larger precession at right angles to the disturbing force created upon them by the precursor force-free fields and waves. The observation of the lateral electron precession waves of these precessing Drude electrons in our instruments is the accepted measurement of the so-called transverse electromagnetic waves in vacuum. The measurement does not measure the oscillation direction of the causative precursor electromagnetic wave in vacuum at all, but only its oscillation effect created in the Drude electron-charged matter. There are really no transverse electromagnetic waves in mass-free space, albeit we seem to be stuck with such a model since the founders of classical electrodynamics assumed the material ether filling all space, and thus used matter waves, force field waves, in space in their modeling. If there were such a material ether, then there would be matter at every point in space, and there would indeed be transverse charge precession electromagnetic waves in this ethereal but real matter filling all space. The continued implicit assumption of a material ether, and the continuing erroneous misinterpretation of what our measurement instruments are measuring, has been erroneously propagated to the present day in electrodynamics since at least 1865. Yet the material ether has been falsified for more than a century, since 1887. The false assumption of the material ether and the resulting false assumption of the transverse electromagnetic force field wave in space continues even after Drude's fundamental work. To my knowledge, no other Western analyst has pointed out the connection between longitudinal restraint of the Drude electrons to a slow drift velocity, with the restrained electron's lateral precession in such a case. So we argue that the Drude electron precession proves that the electromagnetic waves in matter-free space are longitudinal rather than transverse, precisely as Tesla stated. We pointed out this anomaly in the erroneous force in empty space theory for years, to little avail. The Soviets weaponized it. Conventional electromagnetism and electrical engineering still erroneously assume the old material ether. The misinterpretation of the detected transverse electromagnetic force field waves as actual force field waves in a material space has been perpetuated erroneously in classical electrodynamics since its inception, and it continues today. The entire U.S. scientific apparatus, including the National Academy of Sciences, National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, national laboratories, and universities, continues to bury its head firmly in the sand, covering itself with the old luminiferous material ether. Those measured waves in our measuring instruments really are transverse electromagnetic force field effect waves in and of the interacting Drude electron material medium in the conductors of the intercepting instrument. But the causative interacting electromagnetic field entities in the vacuum are themselves force-free longitudinal electromagnetic wave disturbances of the curvature of space-time, general relativity view, and of the local virtual particle flux of the vacuum, particle physics view. Else the theory of gyro precession is voided by every Drude electron and by every transverse electromagnetic force field wave detection in Drude electron gases. The electromagnetic force fields so blithely assumed by our present electrodynamics absolutely do not and cannot exist in mass-free space, since force only exists in a mass system in and during its ongoing interaction with the force-free precursor fields. The elemental responses of the charged mass system are at right angles to the disturbing force-free fields. Neither do transverse electromagnetic effect waves exist in mass-free space, but only in charged mass systems, such as the Drude electron gas, engaged in an ongoing interaction with the longitudinal precursor waves. Here also, the element response of the mass system is at right angles to the force-free fields of the disturbing precursor wave. The primary, longitudinal force-free fields in massless space are the more fundamental electromagnetic fields, as Tesla had realized. Tesla actually began the process later partially captured by Whittaker, which was taken to fruition after World War II by Soviet weapons scientists as the new weapons science of energetics. It is what the present author is calling precursor waves, precursor fields, and precursor engineering. Our archaic and flawed situation in conventional electromagnetism and electrical engineering today. Sadly, electrical engineering departments still erroneously teach electromagnetic force fields and electromagnetic transverse electromagnetic force field waves in space, which still assumes the old luminiferous material ether, even though it was falsified in 1887 by the Michelson-Morley experiments. Jackson, one of the superb classical electrodynamicists of our day, at least admits the problem and also admits that electrodynamicists continue to ignore it. He states, most classical electrodynamicists continue to adhere to the notion that the electromagnetic force field exists as such in the vacuum, but do admit that physically measurable quantities such as force somehow involve the product of charge and field. In summary, one does not have electromagnetic force until the force-free precursor field in space is interacting with charged mass. It can easily be seen by examining the simple standard electromagnetism equation force equals electric field multiplied by charge Q, and writing it as F equals E multiplied by Q so that it becomes a true definition. Now let charge Q equals 0, as it would be in space. In that case, force equals 0, even though E is not 0. In that identity, force is the ongoing interaction of the force-free E field in space with charged mass Q. Given Q and its interaction with force-free E, that ongoing interaction is the rigorous definition of n generatrix for force itself. What is missing from the identity and therefore the definition is that F and E are at right angles to each other because of the spin of the charged particles comprising Q. Again, let charge Q equal 0, while E remains non-zero. In that case, there is no ongoing interaction of E with charged matter, since there is no charged matter. Therefore the effect of such a reaction force F goes to 0 because there is no interaction and therefore there is no effect of an interaction. So the equation should really be written as an identity, to show clearly that force is produced by, and exists as, an ongoing interaction of the force-free E field in space with charged matter Q. The sharp-eyed reader will note that we may have, hopefully successfully, solved Feynman's force definition problem, at least electromagnetically. An electromagnetic force in static charged matter is identically the ongoing effect, in the static charged matter, of an ongoing interaction of the force-free electromagnetic field in space with that static charged matter. Further, the direction of the force field effect is at right angles to the direction of the primary force-free electromagnetic field in space. Eminent scientists such as Feynman, Wheeler, Lindsay, Margina, Bunge, and many others have pointed out that there are no force fields in space. But our electrical engineering departments and classical Maxwell-Heaviside electrodynamicists refuse to change and correct the horribly flawed conventional electromagnetic electrical engineering model. Repeating for emphasis, Feynman stated it this way. The existence of the positive charge, in some sense, distorts, or creates a condition in space, so that when we put the negative charge in, it feels a force. This potentiality for producing a force is called an electric field. In other words, a force-free condition in pure mass-free space which only has the capability to interact with a charged mass and thus create force in that ongoing interaction is what a true E field is. Feynman understood that true fields were naught but conditions in space itself, and change in space itself. He clearly understood that only the interaction of the field with charged mass, should some be introduced, produces electromagnetic force fields in that mass. So our present electrical engineers have absolutely no notion at all of what a force-free electromagnetic field in mass-free space really is. They have never even calculated a real E field in space, and they do not do so today nor do their professors and their textbooks. Other severe foundations errors in our conventional electromagnetic electrical engineering. Indeed, the insane conventional electromagnetic electrical engineering model still erroneously assumes a flat spacetime, falsified since at least 1916, an inert vacuum, falsified since at least 1930, and a material ether, falsified more than a century ago. It also assumes that every electromagnetic field, electromagnetic potential, and joule of electromagnetic energy in the universe is and has been freely created out of nothing at all, by the associated source charge, which is assumed to continuously emit real observable electromagnetic energy without any energy input at all. In so doing, the conventional electromagnetic electrical engineering model implicitly assumes the universal violation of the conservation of energy law. Every electrical engineering department, professor, and textbook in the United States unwittingly advocates the total violation of energy conservation, without even recognizing it. So do our National Academy of Sciences, National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, great national laboratories, our intelligence analysts and the entire Taliban-like professional skeptic community by not pointing out the known terrible errors in classical electrodynamics and electrical engineering, and by not correcting the flawed model. The development of scalar interferometry. There are two papers by E.T. Whittaker, one in 1903 and the other in 1904, that detail the beginning of scalar interferometry. Shortly after World War II, these two papers are what the Soviet Union scientists used as one of the starting points to develop a secret weapons science called energetics. From their new science of energetics, they first developed very powerful scalar interferometers, now possessed secretly by at least 10 nations worldwide, and even by the Japanese Yakuza. For a deeper understanding of scalar interferometry, a higher group symmetry electrodynamics must be used, instead of the standard model's limited U1, electrodynamics. From Russia, the Yakuza also took back the actual scalar interferometry technology to Japan with them, and set up production facilities of their own. It is not the Japanese government that is doing this, but it is the Japanese mafia and a remnant of the Aum Shinrikyo, which changed its name to Aleph. The Yakuza is very powerful, and it penetrates the Japanese government and also every large Japanese company. If one is dealing with a large Japanese company, one is dealing with the Yakuza, whether one knows it or not. In 1997, then Secretary of Defense William Cohen at a conference on weapons of mass destruction, WMD, held in Georgia under the auspices of Senator Sam Nunn publicly confirmed this kind of electromagnetic weaponry without the technical details. He also confirmed the weather engineering, climate control, induction of earthquakes, and stimulation of volcanoes into eruption. SEC-Def Cohen stated. Others terrorists are engaging even in an echo type of terrorism whereby they can alter the climate, set off earthquakes, volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic wave. So there are plenty of ingenious minds out there that are at work finding ways in which they can wreak terror upon other nations. It's real, and that's the reason why we have to intensify our efforts, and that's why this is so important. This was the first time, and to my knowledge, the only time, a high US government official has openly confirmed the superweapons. So obviously certain parts of our government do know about such weapons, but there has been little or no communication of that to the public, save by SEC-Def Cohen's illuminating statement. The news media at the time, panting heavily after the juicy Clinton-Lewinsky sex scandal, totally ignored Cohen's epical strategic statement. So much for the perspicacity of our news media. The Yakuza's strategic role in our present terrorism threat. Today the Yakuza Aum Shinrikyo is one of our deadly foes, and it will be involved in the planned, scheduled destruction of the United States within about 3 years from now. One major part of the plan seems to be to start destroying the U.S. central power grid and system beginning about 2 years from now, very gradually at first, and then escalating fairly rapidly until the system is essentially destroyed and in ruins. There are already sufficient terrorist assets inserted into the U.S. being held ready and waiting to destroy the nation, particularly when the use of Yakuza's strategic and tactical scalar interferometers are factored in. One keeps hoping that the administration will brief that fact to the U.S. public, but it appears it will not be done, regardless of whether we have a Republican or Democratic administration in power. Too many high-level government people take the attitude that the American public just could not withstand such information. Further, within the government the entourage seems to have again suppressed the information that Defense Secretary Cohen confirmed. The Yakuza's strategic threat to the U.S. is one of the most potent we face today, and it increases year by year. That threat, as is much of the organized international terrorist threat, is being generally coordinated from the old die-hard communist faction of the FSB-KGB, the dominant faction. Suppression of energy from the vacuum electrical systems. Electrical power systems freely taking their energy from the vacuum, EFTV, rather than from fuel, are suppressed worldwide by several large and powerful cartels, and for some time the Yakuza has suppressed such Japanese energy from the vacuum systems in Japan. As part of their schedule and plan to destroy our electrical power supply as a means of generating the catastrophic collapse of the U.S. economy, the Yakuza have suppressed several legitimate Japanese over-unity electrical power systems such as the Takahashi magnetic Wankel engine and the Kawai motor to prevent them from being marketed. Were these already developed Japanese systems allowed on the market, they would quickly resolve the world energy crisis for once and for all, and they would also enable dismantling and rapid replacement of the horridly vulnerable, centralized U.S. electrical power system. Needless to say, the availability of such systems would enormously clean up the biospheric contamination from energy-related operations and development, alleviate global warming, etc. It is asinine that, in every electromagnetic circuit and system, all the field energy and potential energy already comes directly from the vacuum, being extracted by the source charges and dipolar ITYs, and yet our own scientific community perpetuates a model assuming the energy is freely created out of nothing at all. We do not have to discover how to extract usable electromagnetic energy from the seething vacuum, every charge in the universe already continuously does that, and it continuously gushes forth real electromagnetic energy extracted from its vacuum interaction. All we have to do is uncover and eliminate the continuing limitations our scientists have unwittingly incorporated into the conventional electromagnetics electrical engineering model itself, such as in the ubiquitous closed current loop circuit containing the source dipolarity, the source of flowing potential energy, wired into the external circuit as a load to be continually destroyed, and such as insisting on invariance and Lorentz symmetry of the model because of the mathematical beauty in symmetrized equations and an invariant system. By invariance one means that no new net observable is allowed to occur when the equations are Riga-Euclid. To do that requires symmetrical Riga-Eucliding. On the other hand, by deliberately breaking up the invariance and violating Lorentz symmetry, the resulting modified circuits and systems can indeed rather freely collect excess energy, that is, asymmetrically regauge themselves, from the active vacuum's interaction with all the circuit's charges and the continuous, free flow of real electromagnetic energy from every charge. By asymmetrical Riga-Eucliding, a net non-zero, free force field is also produced, and it can then be used to freely dissipate the previously collected free potential energy in external loads to power them almost for free, as far as any cost to the operator for the energy dissipated. No law of physics is violated, and no valid law of thermodynamics is violated once the erroneous second law is corrected and is no longer the oxymoron and half law it presently is. Sometimes simple equations contain profound truths. From any fixed source of potential V, any amount of energy W can be freely collected on intercepting charges Q, given sufficient Q. The simple equation is energy W equals voltage times charge Q. Further, by only increasing V, while pinning a fixed amount of charges Q so that current I equals change of charge in time dQ dt equals 0, any amount of potential energy density V can be freely produced in the system by work-free voltage amplification. From such simple equations, one can see that a circuit can self-regauge and take on extra potential energy freely, from any external source of potential energy, providing the necessary potential energy flow, without having to do work. With change of charge dQ dt equals 0, the free potentialization of as many charges Q as one desires does not drain the external source of potential at all. If that source of potential is then disconnected, and the circuit is closed and the charges Q are unpinned, the freely potentialized circuit can then freely dissipate that excess energy to power loads for free. Further, the original source of potential can then be reconnected, to again freely potentialize as many charges Q as desired, so long as one forces change of charge dq/dt equals 0. In short, the external source of potential will last indefinitely. Via a flashlight battery or electret as the external potential source, under proper circumstances sufficient energy can be extracted from the vacuum to power New York City. Again, we do not have to learn how to extract energy from the vacuum. We only have to learn how to more properly use the energy flowing from charges already doing so. Our classical electrodynamicists and electrical engineers have missed the fact that, since every electromagnetic field and potential is a pattern in the continuous flow of electromagnetic energy from the associated source charges, then the field or potential is itself a set of continuous energy flows. To see it and prove it, simply decompose the field or potential by Whittaker's methods. As an example of Yakuza suppression of Japanese energy from the vacuum electrical systems, the Kawai motor was suppressed by the Yakuza right here in Huntsville, Alabama in 1996, directly involving the CTEC Board of Directors. Else my colleagues and I in CTEC would already have placed self-powering Kawai motors on the world market in mid-1997. Such self-powering electrical systems are no more mysterious than a windmill-powered generator or a solar cell array power system. The active vacuum environment furnishes all the energy required. Even though any system has losses and its overall thermodynamic efficiency is always less than 100%, the coefficient of performance, COP, can permissibly be coefficient of performance equals infinity. When all the energy is received from the external active environment and the operator himself does not furnish any energy at all. We, CTEC, reached agreement with Kawai late one Thursday afternoon. The Yakuza arrived by private jet from Los Angeles that night. The next morning a stunned and totally demolished Kawai no longer controlled his invention, his company, his life, or further developments. The energy from the vacuum replacement systems, for our present centralized electrical power system, would freely or nearly freely take their energy directly from the local vacuum. They would need no external fuel, no pipelines, no large fleets of tankers and railroad coal cars, no hydrocarbon refineries, etc. So most of the massive and expensive support structure for our bloated centralized electrical power system would also be dismantled. Our present dependence on foreign oil and gas would simply vanish forever. A very dramatic reduction in present pollution of the environment would result. The dramatic reduction in the present absolute vulnerability of the U.S. electrical power system would be remarkable. Replacement of most of the centralized power system would be of enormous economic benefit and of enormous strategic importance. Presently, we have some 2 years to get a substantial percentage of that task done, in precisely that manner. Otherwise, we will see the centralized electrical power system destroyed, followed shortly thereafter by the catastrophic collapse of the U.S. economy. And then will immediately follow the methodical destruction of the United States. Every last man, woman, and child. The resulting benefits of such a centralized, fuel-free system to the taxpayer and to the long-suffering destitute peoples of the world would be incalculable. But the incredible loss of revenue to the large energy cartels now in power worldwide would be directly calculable. Such powerful organizations do not surrender their vast empires and dominant positions without a major struggle. So certain elements of those cartels already suppress free energy developments worldwide, and they have been doing so since Stubblefield, even before Tesla. In this energy from the vacuum research, if successful, one can easily meet with a sudden suicide on one's way to the supermarket, unless one is exceedingly careful. Or one can be hit in the midst of a crowd by an ice dart dipped in curare, so that one convulses and dies right there with a seizure and heart and brain damage. Or heroin can be planted on the premises secretly by an intruder. Then the regular narcs are tipped off. They raid the place, the dogs sniff out the large cache of heroin, and one has been caught red-handed as a dirty old dope dealer. one winds up behind bars for 20 years or so, wondering how it all happened. Or one meets with a throwaway assassin, who has been brutally conditioned. After he successfully fixates on his target, then later he will march right up to the targeted individual in a public restaurant, pull out a pistol and empty it at point-blank range into the target, killing him. He will remain right there until the police come and haul him away. And even electric shocks on his testicles will not elicit any useful information from him. Or, more simply, one just meets with a fatal auto accident. Or one gets hit with a little microwave shooter, whose wave front has been carefully modified by the Venus ECM technique. That beam will then dramatically disrupt the receiving heart, throwing it into violent and uncontrolled fibrillation. The target falls, goes into convulsions, thrashes a bit, and expires with a legitimate massive stroke, heart attack, or both. The smaller short-range shooter is about the size of a small paperback textbook, and fits inside the assassin's coat pocket. A larger longer-range shooter is about the size of a bazooka. It will shoot right through walls and windows, killing a person inside. The target is usually located with an infrared device which allows the assassin to focus on the target's body heat, even through the wall or window. Or a professional hitman kills the person, making it appear as some hoodlum committing a robbery or some such. Recently Dr. Jean Malov, an excellent researcher and a highly dedicated scientist, probably was murdered in this latter type of professional hit manner. Those are just a few of the current methods used of professional clandestine assassination or jailing, used against some energy from the vacuum researchers. There are many others. But to seek out what our own science is doing in energy from the vacuum research, simply go to the websites of the NAS, NSF, DOE, national labs, and universities and search for any real program or solution that would enable our survival in this 3-year period we have entered. Cut through the rhetoric and hype and examine for real content that would solve the problem. There is none, and there is not going to be any. Instead, the reader will find that business as usual and the interests of the powerful scientific cartels, hot fusion, nuclear power plants, fuel cells, etc., are being pursued, with a little sop to the environmentalists in such things as solar cell array power systems, windmill-powered generating systems, etc. Not only is our scientific community fiddling while Rome prepares to burn, but it is also helping to ensure that Rome burns completely. Yakuza production of portable scalar interferometers. The Yakuza now produce their own scalar interferometer weapons in their own facilities in Japan, including small, portable versions, and this has nothing to do with the Japanese government. The Yakuza have small versions of these weapons which can fit into a small sport utility vehicle, SUV, and undoubtedly some are also already inserted in the US, to be used a few times during the next 2 years against our refineries, nuclear power plants and hydrocarbon-fueled power plants, oil fields and Gulf oil rigs, control systems and substations for the centralized power grid, pipeline hubs, long high-voltage distribution lines, etc. In short, the Yakuza can already lay down the US electrical power system, for months at a time or permanently. And it can do it easily, quickly, and at will. Even normal cyberwar techniques will do it for extended periods, as is well known by cyberwar specialists. For example, quoting from a PBS interview with Joe Weiss. Question: so just put it all in perspective. What's the worst case power scenario? Power, we're talking here power lines, power grid. Answer: absolute worst? I won't even say absolute, but a very worst case could be loss of power for 6 months or more. Question: over how big an area? Answer: big as you want. Question: is that a possibility? Answer: yes. Presently we are in the 2-year slowly escalating initial operations phase of the centralized asymmetric warfare plan for the destruction of the United States. Then, beginning about 2 years from now, the final operations phase will swiftly occur, and the already damaged entire U.S. centralized electrical power system will be destroyed quickly and rather permanently. The destruction will be by combined attacks, including cyber war, with a guaranteed destruction furnished by Yakuza tactical and strategic interferometers, portable electromagnetic pulse shooters, etc. Again, all this is coordinated by centralized FSB-KGB planning under its major faction, the old die-hard communists who control the FSB-KGB and also control and operate the Russian superweapons. That communist faction of the FSB-KGB thus has and retains the dominant power position in Russia, because it possesses the Russian superweapons. Copiously supplying lots of Russian oil to the United States is not the intention of the dominant die-hard communist faction, because that faction still fervently plans to totally destroy the United States. Russian President Vladimir Putin comes from the younger, more modern faction of the FSB-KGB. That faction would very much like to reach a full accommodation with the US. Putin would like to become our trusted cheap oil supplier, and pump lots of US development and royalty money into the Russian economy, benefiting it at every level. But Putin will not be permitted to do that to the full extent. Consequently, Russian oil shipments to China, overland by rail, have been stopped, stimulating China into becoming more aggressive in other world oil markets such as the Middle East. The largest oil consortium in Russia is under strong legal attack and direct interference by the state, significantly hampering its production and delivery of oil, particularly to the US. The old Cold War has not gone away, contrary to popular conception. Instead, it has just been turned into a completely different kind of war, called asymmetric warfare. And the same old dogs are still calling the shots, like a tired old black and white movie from the 1930s. Hence our asymmetric war problems, that is, our war on terrorism and the war of terrorism on us, will continue. As an example, Putin has had to cave into pressure and again centralize and tighten the control of the Russian government, setting aside the reforms of open election that had been partially implemented. Afghanistan, Iraq, Al-Qaeda, and intended Muslim jihad. The international terrorists are also being subtly and not so subtly manipulated, and we will see the anti-American polarization in the Middle East continue and intensify. Many foreign Arab fighters are fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan right now. Their number and organization and centralized coordination will continue to increase. There are still serious nuclear proliferation problems to be faced in North Korea, Iran, and elsewhere. Iran has announced it is resuming enrichment of uranium and, short of a few ineffective sanctions or attacking Iran, it seems that little can be done. North Korea remains defiant and almost certainly already has a small number of nuclear weapons. Pakistan and India, both nuclear powers, continue a standoff and are eyeball to eyeball. Israel is extremely concerned about the path Iran is taking to achieve a nuclear weapons capability. The Israelis are purchasing several hundred bunker-busting bombs from the US, and at some point Israel may conceivably attack and take out the Iranian nuclear facilities to prevent an unacceptable Iranian nuclear knockout threat being achieved against Israel. The Middle East situation will further heat up, not lessen, over the next 2 years. The intent of our foes is also to deliberately bring substantial factions of the Muslim world to a state of jihad with the United States, necessitating additional commitment of U.S. forces out of country, and increasing the already pressing economic strain on the U.S. Claiming that America had declared war against God and his messenger, bin Laden has called for the murder of any American, anywhere on earth, as the individual duty for every Muslim who can do it in any country in which it is possible to do it. In an American national television interview from Afghanistan, bin Laden stated his intention to kill innocent civilians as well as military, without hesitation. It is far better for anyone to kill a single American soldier than to squander his efforts on other activities. We believe that the worst thieves in the world today and the worst terrorists are the Americans. Nothing could stop you except perhaps retaliation in kind. We do not have to differentiate between military or civilian. As far as we are concerned, they are all targets. The 9/11 Commission report summarized the unrelenting attitude as follows. Many Americans have wondered, why do they hate us? Some also ask, what can we do to stop these attacks? Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda have given answers to both these questions. To the first, they say that America had attacked Islam. America is responsible for all conflicts involving Muslims. Thus Americans are blamed when Israelis fight with Palestinians, when Russians fight with Chechens, when Indians fight with Kashmiri Muslims, and when the Philippine government fights ethnic Muslims in its southern islands. America is also held responsible for the governments of Muslim countries, derided by Al-Qaeda as your agents. To the second question, what America could do, Al-Qaeda's answer was that America should abandon the Middle East, convert to Islam, and end the immorality and godlessness of its society and culture. Al-Qaeda states you are the worst civilization witnessed by the history of mankind. If the United States did not comply, it would be at war with the Islamic nation, a nation that Al-Qaeda's leaders said desires death more than you desire life. This perhaps explains the morose statement of Vice President Cheney, only a month or so after 9/11, and after he had received intensive briefings on terrorism and its present conduct against the United States. Cheney stated, "The war on terrorism will not be over in our lifetime. It is different than the Gulf War was in the sense that it may never end. At least not in our lifetime. The way I think of it is, it's a new normalcy. Welcome to asymmetric warfare, where war is war, peace is war, and there is only perpetual war." Our analysts missed the Yakuza's key role and significant aspects of the centrally coordinated KGB-FSB strategic plan. The problem is that our own intelligence agencies do not appear to be aware of the key role being played by the Yakuza. Nor are they aware, it seems, that the centralized KGB-FSB, communist faction, directs the entire asymmetrical warfare against us, so that the actions of the far-flung pieces are coordinated to a strategic plan of increasing intensity and effect. Our intelligence analysts do not appear to realize that we have entered into a 3-year schedule, consisting of a 2-year initial gradual intensification period and a 1-year increase to maximum intensity and total destruction period, to collapse and destroy the United States. The initial 2-year period is a bleed and disorganize the dragon time. The final year is to violently attack and dismember the dragon, while quickly causing its catastrophic economic collapse before midway of that year, and following in the latter half by the swift and utter destruction of the United States by totally unleashing the remaining terrorist assets already inserted into the US and waiting. At present, Bleeding the Dragon is in full progress and being steadily increased as part of the overall strategic plan against us. We are already stretched well past the capability of our regular armed forces, and we are having to induct many of our reserves and National Guard forces for repeated tours overseas. We have no national draft, and a bitter societal polarization will occur if the draft is reinstated. Our national debt and expenses are escalating rapidly. Our country is hemorrhaging jobs also, further increasing unemployment and financial duress. Hurricane and storm damages are being escalated by the increased intensity of the Yakuza weather engineering. Many destructive natural phenomena can be evoked or augmented by the scalar interferometry weapons possessed by the Yakuza. Such phenomena include volcano eruption, earthquake induction, and weather and climate engineering confirmed by Secretary Cohen in his 1997 epical statement. But the achievable phenomena also include tsunamis, freak waves in the open ocean, and rogue waves of numerous kind and occurrence. Quoting Wolfgang Rosenthal of the GKSS Research Center in Geesthacht, Germany on rogue waves. The waves exist in higher numbers than anyone expected. 2 large ships sink every week on average. But the cause is never studied to the same detail as an air crash. It simply gets put down to bad weather. Even supercarrier ships are frequently destroyed by such waves. Over the last 2 decades more than 200 supercarriers cargo ships over 200 m long have been lost at sea. Eyewitness reports suggest many were sunk by high and violent walls of water that rose up out of calm seas. Indeed, a satellite test readily confirmed the occurrence of such previously unsuspected freak giant waves. as part of a project called Max Wave, which was set up to test the rumors. 2 ESA satellites surveyed the oceans. During a 3-week period they detected 10 giant waves, all of which were over 25 meters, 81 feet, high. And that was just with 2 satellites and one small effort to detect such waves. Indeed, during that exact 3-week period while the Max Wave satellites were seeking out huge rogue waves, 2 large tourist liners endured terrifying ordeals from such waves but survived. The Bremen and the Caledonian Star cruisers had their bridge windows smashed by 30 high waves in the South Atlantic. It appears that at least 10 to 12 oil tanker ships are lost each year to giant rogue waves alone. To appreciate total shipping losses from all causes, in a single year 1981 250 ships of 500 tons or greater size were lost and perished. Many of these were probably sunk by unexpected large rogue waves. We hardly need point out that a giant oil supertanker on the ocean is also easily destroyed in a single shot by a strategic scalar interferometer. A burst of energy, placed adroitly under the surface by a distant interferometer, can also produce large waves that arise and smash a ship. This also disguises the incident as if it were due to anomalous large waves of natural origin. With U.S. dependence on foreign oil and most of the oil delivery dependent on supertankers, oil continues to climb in price. Presently the U.S. government has opened the strategic oil reserve a bit, to assist 2 hard-hit companies while they scramble to reinstate their supply. It would take very little Yakuza effort to increase the losses of the oil tankers, thus contributing to insufficient U.S. oil supply and dramatically increasing oil prices. Since the oil supply for all oil-dependent nations comes from known major oil field locations and harbor facilities, deliberate and careful, slow, reduction of the tanker fleet and facilities can place extraordinary pressure on oil's availability for several major nations at once. Coup de grace, strategic strikes of great magnitude. Great coup de grace blows have also been prepared by the Yakuza, in order to guarantee the catastrophic collapse of the U.S. economy, followed by the swift destruction of the United States itself. Several of these coup de grace strikes are based on opportunistic volcano eruptions and tsunamis that can readily be evoked at will by the Yakuza. As an example, a few weeks ago the Yakuza registered one or more of its large scalar interferometers upon the world's largest supervolcano, whose caldera lies underneath the Yellowstone National Park. The symbolic timing so close to the anniversary of the 9/11 attack should not be overlooked. That Yellowstone supervolcano erupts about every 600,000 years, and it has been some 640,000 years since its last eruption. Hence, speaking in geological terms, it is overdue for eruption now, and it already has much of the required overpressure and stress energy established in it. Presently a Yakuza finger is on the trigger of that registered scalar interferometer. If that finger pushes the trigger, the interferometer will slowly add tremendous electromagnetic energy and stress into that great stress zone, which will result in a very violent eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano. By deliberately kindling the supervolcano into such a violent eruption, most of North America would be devastated, and particularly most of the United States. The supervolcano could eject more ash, lava, rock, and debris than the entire Grand Canyon can hold. Additional side effects would include the instant destruction of most of the agricultural food crops in North America by covering the farmland with meters-thick ash. Any few survivors would be faced with the immediate problem of starvation and quickly fatal lung disease. Food animals would also be killed in the same catastrophe. The reader should simply check what happened the last time that supervolcano erupted, about 640,000 years ago. It did devastate a great part of North America, including most of the higher life forms. Most of all, in 1997 Secretary of Defense William Cohen specifically confirmed that terrorists already were using electromagnetic weapons to stimulate volcanoes into eruption. Since that is confirmed, and since the Yakuza has the scalar interferometers to do so, then it follows that the Yakuza also will have sought out and deliberately selected the most damaging volcano eruptions that could be induced to strategically destroy or severely maul the United States. And so it has. To further show the killing power of supervolcano explosions, about 11 million years ago, a volcano at Bruno Jarbidge in Idaho covered half of North America with ash 2 meters thick. Such ash, for example, was confirmed in Nebraska, with mass extinction of North American megafauna. Many of the animals died from Murray's disease, a symptom of deadly lung disease from the ash. 11 million years ago, a single giant volcanic eruption south of Hagerman, Idaho piled ash 2 meters thick at 1,600 to 2,000 kilometers distance. It quickly choked to death most of the vast animal population of much of North America, as shown by examination of the distinctive fossils in areas such as Nebraska. One should also check what probably happened 74,000 years or so ago, with the explosion of a large supervolcano whose caldera today lies under Lake Toba, on the Indonesian island of Sumatra. Though the findings are still somewhat controversial, increasingly it appears from multiple evidence that the eruption of Toba wiped out all human life on Earth except for a few thousand humans in a location in Africa. This follows a formal theory by Professor Stanley H. Ambrose, which has gained support because of supporting geological findings and because of independent direct human genetic support for the timing. Genetically, the human mitochondrial genetic trace clearly shows a dramatic and sudden reduction in genetic variability, called a genetic bottleneck some 74,000 years ago. Also, present human genetics shows that all of us today came from Africa. Apparently so we did. After some years of continuing extinction, then during the last 74,000 years following that violent eruption, every human born on the planet has been a descendant of that few thousand humans surviving in Africa. Apparently all other humans on Earth were destroyed in the die-off, along with their inherited genetic variations, producing a profound genetic bottleneck in the entire human species. Quoting Professor Lynn Jord, University of Utah, a specialist in mitochondrial DNA who is using its deep analysis to investigate mankind's past. We have a dramatic reduction in genetic diversity during this time when the population is very small, and then after the bottleneck the people who we see today would be descendants only of those who survived. And they're going to be genetically much more similar to one another, reducing the amount of genetic variation. Mutations in the mitochondria take place with clock-like regularity, so the number of mutations gives us a clock essentially that we can use to approximately date the major event. In the case of a population bottleneck, we think that this would have occurred roughly 70 to 80,000 years ago, give or take some number of thousands of years. So then the real question is, what could have caused such a reduction? An extreme reduction? In the human population down to as few as 5 or 10,000 individuals. Increasingly the cause appears to be almost certainly the recognized supervolcano eruption at Toba, some 74,000 years or so ago. As another example, there is a volcano named Cumber Vija, on the island of La Palma in the Canary Islands, which split in the past. The split-off western flank of it is still hanging above the ocean, poised to slip off into the sea, and that rock is about the size of the entire Isle of Manitoba. When that poised giant rock does crash into the sea, it will evoke massive tsunamis, moving outward at some 600 miles per hour. Some 7 to 10 hours later, a tsunami which could be several tens of meters in height will strike New York, Boston, and the eastern seaboard, penetrating inland and devastating the area. It is not a matter of if the incident will occur, but only a matter of when. Such tsunamis from underwater volcanoes, seafloor earthquakes, and other shocks occur around the world, including in the Pacific Ocean as well. For the Pacific, quoting, "In the last 1,000 years, Pacific Ocean tsunamis have been observed and recorded over 1,000 times. All of these were major catastrophic events, since smaller events often go unrecorded. Cumber Vija presents another wonderful opportunity to the Yakuza. The Yakuza will almost certainly have already registered several large scalar interferometers on that volcano, since the triggering factor could easily be the eruption of the volcano. If so, then this is one of the earthquake eruptions that is almost certain to be initiated by the Yakuza, during the next 2 years, to assist in causing huge economic damage and mass casualties to the eastern coast of the United States. Incredibly, there is apparently no ongoing U.S. monitoring of Kumbh Vijaya, to allow an advance warning issued to the populace of the eastern seaboard of the United States if the quake occurs and the giant tsunami is produced. Without such warning and some hours of lead time to evacuate the threatened major cities, great loss of life will occur in the U.S. in addition to the great economic destruction. As pointed out by Stockton, there is also the possibility of heating methane hydrates, frozen natural gas, on the eastern continental shelf to cause massive undersea landslides, which would also cause tsunamis. Again, we strongly stress the overwhelming strategic significance of Secretary of Defense Cohen's statement in April 1997. The Secretary was referring to a grave strategic destructive capability, already in the hands of the terrorists and available. He was confirming that this capability is already being used by the terrorists in their asymmetric war against us. That strategic destructive capability, when adroitly utilized as in the rather simple examples given, is as powerful as the full nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile capability of the Soviet Union or the United States. Since the Yakuza interferometers can also massively intervene in submarine volcanic and earthquake activity on the ocean floor worldwide, the capability to induce giant tsunamis and other violent waves, in addition to giant quakes and volcanic eruptions, is extraordinarily significant. Summary of some weather engineering and other capabilities. Some of the simpler scalar interferometer capabilities in engineering of the weather and geophysical events are steering the jet streams, thus steering or guiding weather entities. By warming the air in one region, the warm air expands so that it is thinner. Thus the interferometry makes a low-pressure area in that region. By gradually moving the warming region, by moving the interference zone's location, the low-pressure area is steered and its path is determined. By cooling the air in a region, a high-pressure area is created, and it is steered in the same fashion. By making multiple highs and lows and adroitly positioning and steering them, the jet streams and other prevailing winds can be entrained, captured and steered. This alone allows substantial augmentation and steering of weather effects. By warming or cooling the moisture and air in a large storm or front, the power of the front can be affected. By producing negative energy pulses inside a storm, the negative energy Dirac holes eat electron charges in the storm, diminishing the charge in the storm and reducing the storm's power. By producing positive electromagnetic energy pulses inside a storm, extra electrons can be lifted from the Dirac, increasing the charge and power of the storm. By building very large rotation in the path of a storm, and then by sharply decreasing the diameter of the curving for a sharper curvature, the angular momentum of the overall storm will spawn spin-off concentrated spins, resulting in the formation of tornadoes, waterspouts, etc. By establishing a large high-pressure area in a region, that region acts as a block for normal winds and storm directions at lower pressures. By establishing a large low-pressure area in a region, that region acts as an attractant for normal winds and storm activity at higher pressure. By focusing the interference zone inside a volcano to its magma, and steadily depositing additional electromagnetic energy in the piezoelectric matter, a buildup of pressure in the volcano is induced. Eventually the volcano will erupt from the increased pressure. If the increase in pressure is applied slowly, the slow increase in pressure will be held longer by the static friction, so that a higher pressure is reached before the volcano erupts. This engenders a large and violent eruption, with consequently greater ejection and distant dispersion of ash, lava, and other debris. By more rapidly inputting the energy into the volcano, the eruption will occur at a lower pressure and so a smaller eruption will ensue. All sorts of patterns of electromagnetic energy, glowing spheres, hemispheres, etc. can be produced, and these can be used against various targets, either for electrical and electronic destruction or for electromagnetic explosions of these balls of energy once they contact the intended target. By depositing the extra interferometry energy in a fault zone location, the increased piezoelectric activity will also result in increased stress in the rocks, thereby inducing an earthquake when the rocks finally slip. By adjusting the rate at which the excess energy is added, the size of the resulting earthquake can also be changed. By increasing the charge of a storm, its electrical activity and the resulting lightning strikes can be increased. This is useful, for example, in repeatedly producing large forest fires, particularly when combined with weather engineering to produce a drought condition. On the other hand, by decreasing the charge of a storm, its electrical activity and therefore its lightning strike activity can be decreased. By inducing repeatedly pulsed negative energy in an area containing living animals or humans, the animals or humans can be directly killed. Strong pulsing will result in rather instant death, where the bodies drop limply, with not even a nerve cell firing thereafter. Everything living? Cells, microbes, viruses, whatever. In the struck bodies is killed instantly, and the bodies do not decay, even over a month or more. The Soviets tested such weaponry in this mode against 2 Afghan villages in their own war in Afghanistan, and it is probable that the Yakuza is now able to produce portable weapons with this capability. Since the longitudinal electromagnetic waves used in the interferometry of a scalar interferometer easily penetrate Faraday shields, the ocean, the earth, etc., such weapons are very useful in attacking deep underground targets and facilities and destroying them or wreaking damage. In Japan, the Yakuza has demonstrated this capability on a few occasions to kill severe Japanese critics inside deep shelters or shielded facilities. The significant impact on strategic command and control centers in underground bunkers and facilities can be easily appreciated. Essentially all facilities and personnel become vulnerable. The use of a more portable scalar interferometer to destroy the electronic controls of a normal or nuclear power plant from a distance is obvious. With nuclear power plants this poses the risk of a meltdown. Electrical controls for pipe valves, etc. are also vulnerable. The storage of spent nuclear fuel rods is largely underwater in pools on normal power plant sites. If the water is drained from those pools, the rods will heat up and again a meltdown condition or very hazardous venting of radioactivity can ensue. The control systems for hydroelectric dams are deadly vulnerable to scalar interferometry attack. Large electronic complexes such as switching and control systems, centralized control systems for power grids and substations, etc. are deadly vulnerable to scalar interferometry attack, by either long-range or short-range interferometers. Chemical plants, refineries, fuel storage sites, tank farms, etc. are also deadly vulnerable to scalar interferometry, including portable attack. Liquid natural gas ships, oil tankers, etc. are also highly vulnerable to scalar interferometry attack. Surges on the power distribution grid transmission lines can easily be accomplished by scalar interferometry, methodically causing great damage to the grid and emergency shutdown of most of its feeding power plants. As much of the grid as desired can easily be kept non-functional, as long as desired, by occasional repeats. Many other capabilities also exist to use the interferometry to affect the weather, the atmosphere, the rocks in the earth or at the bottom of the ocean, etc. Once the Yakuza scalar interferometers are factored into the strategic terrorist threat situation, there is no recourse that can save the present centralized electrical power system. Instead, the only way to prevent the induced total economic collapse of the United States by collapsing the centralized electrical power system, is to immediately initiate the strongest possible energy from the vacuum systems development and production program, to replace the entire centralized power system, including its long distribution lines and large feeder power plants. That system is simply not defensible and not sustainable against the threat as it already exists, and against the hostile assets already successfully inserted or waiting in support from abroad. As can be seen, the action that is necessary if we are to prevent our total economic collapse in a little more than 2 years, and also our subsequent total destruction, is a Manhattan-type project to massively develop and deploy energy from the vacuum electrical power systems. We bluntly state without further discussion that such systems are indeed already developed in our own country and worldwide, and so they are available, but they have deliberately been withheld or suppressed for many decades. Short of a direct presidential order and decision directive, there appears to be no way that the necessary program can be or will be galvanized. Our morose assessment is that, unless some other major strategic factor enters the conflict, the Yakuza and terrorists, under present centralized control and planning, will probably succeed in catastrophically destroying the U.S. economy on schedule, leaving the U.S. prostrate for its subsequent physical destruction in a giant turkey shoot. U.S. Societal polarizations are being gradually increased. Among sociologists, there is much support for the position that societal polarizations are phenomena which naturally tend to increase anyway. Further, many pollsters already state that the nation is very seriously polarized already, as the election looms. For example, quoting John Zogby, "I have been calling this the Armageddon election now for months because we are so polarized, so split culturally, politically, ideologically, demographically, like almost no other time in American history. The last time the nation was this deeply divided over what course to take was the original Armageddon election of 1800. However, for the first time in history, certain rather esoteric FSB-KGB weapons are being directly employed to gradually intensify the societal polarizations in America. Straight versus gay, conservative versus liberal, Republican versus Democrat, one religion against another, one race against another, labor class versus financial class, etc. The strategic objective is that these increasing societal polarizations will become so fierce that, about 2 years from now, they will also be spilling into the streets of our cities in serious rioting and bloodshed, resulting in chaos, martial law, etc. and severe polarization and disorganization. So far, this plan, deliberate escalation of our societal polarizations, is right on schedule, as anyone can see now, and as one will increasingly see in the time remaining prior to the election. U.S. societal polarizations will increase in intensity until the election, after which the polarizations and their intensities will remain. And in fact they will continue to increase after the election is over. Temporary conversions and fractional conversions of the minds and mind operations, and therefore the behavior, of selected leaders or prime movers in the various polarization areas are being used. This capability has arisen from the branch of energetics known as psychoenergetics, and such measures are now being used in a highly selected manner to intensify our polarizations. Dramatic tests of distant, total control of a person's mind and behavior, while that person was performing an intensive technical task, flying and operating an aircraft as a weapons platform, were conducted against Captains Button and Svoboda in 1997, and against Captain Hess in 1998. Those dramatic suicides were deliberate, high-profile stimuli to see if our own intelligence analysts yet knew anything about psychoenergetics. The answer obtained was a very resounding and clear no, they are still ignorant of that area, and hence the nation is still deadly vulnerable to use of such weapons and effects. Captain Hess, for example, on his morning exercise jog suddenly veered aside, sat down, and calmly stabbed himself in the neck and torso some 26 times, including multiple thrusts through the heart. Note that the shock of a stab through the heart is considered in forensic medicine as generating such shock and recoil of the autonomic nervous system that it is not possible for an intentional suicide to continue, much less to achieve a total of 26 repeated stabs, until the body simply toppled over non-functional. In short, total control of even the deep autonomic nervous system was demonstrated resoundingly. As stated, the Yakuza is a major arm of the KGB's coordinated asymmetric war and terrorism. The Yakuza reports to and coordinates with those hidden FSB KGB directors. The Yakuza view is that, together with the other terrorist organizations already having infiltrated substantial assets into this nation, and together with chaos in U.S. streets due to severe polarizations gradually being intensified now, they are already helping to bleed the dragon increasingly. Then within 2 years they will joyfully begin the direct destruction of the centralized U.S. electrical power system and other key economic targets, harbors, refineries, pipelines, etc. They will also participate in immune system spreading, explained later in this paper, as a force amplifier to biological warfare strikes by other terrorists. As all this destruction ramps up over the next 2 years, it will crescendo and catastrophically collapse the entire economy of the US within about 2.5 years from now. Given the planned present offensive schedule and the insertions already accomplished, indeed the plan for full strategic destruction of the US is likely to succeed. The psychoenergetics conversions and fractional conversions are a program in support of the present 3-year schedule for strategic destruction of the US. So it is also a program in support of the strategic destruction of the centralized US electrical power system including its infrastructure. The original targets desired for the 9/11 attack actually were nuclear power plants etc. Parts of the centralized electrical power system rather than the more symbolic Twin Towers, Pentagon, and White House. The targeting was apparently changed by bin Laden himself. He felt that his assets in place and available were not yet sufficiently trained to produce a truly effective, coordinated simultaneous set of attacks on nuclear power plants and other harder targets. So to guarantee success, he opted for strikes on symbolic targets, which would provide great publicity stimulus in the Mideast for his cause, in addition to causing great consternation in the United States. Insertion has been much greater than publicly acknowledged. Long before its economic collapse in the latter 1980s, the former Soviet Union inserted nuclear weapons in all our major cities and population centers, with the Spetsnaz teams to detonate them on order. One should read Luna's book. He even tells a few of the ways the nuclear weapons were inserted. Those Russian KGB FSB weapons and Spetsnaz teams are still here, waiting for the order to detonate the nuclear weapons and destroy the United States in short order. They are also still under the control of the dominant communist faction of the FSB KGB, not by the younger and more liberal faction from which Putin comes. This is the same faction plotting and coordinating the 3-year strategic terrorism plan and other measures for the full destruction of the United States. These inserted Russian nuclear weapons and teams may well be partially unleashed and brought into play during the operations phase, first as a very few substantial nuclear explosions in major U.S. population centers. The result will be great loss of life, nuclear contamination of several large U.S. cities, complete overwhelming of our homeland defense and medical mass casualties capability, and terrible physical damage to further guarantee the scheduled catastrophic U.S. economic collapse. As previously mentioned, we would have been destroyed by the former Soviet Union in the late 1970s, by those successfully inserted Soviet nuclear weapons already at their target sites on station in the US, except that a friendly nation also inserted nuclear weapons massively into the cities and key target areas of Russia. Those friendly weapons are also still in place, waiting for the order for their detonation if necessary. This sort of thing in the old days of Cold War intelligence was called dead man fusing. Being chess players and rational adversaries, the Russians can be countered by a balance of terror including dead man fusing. The old mutual assured destruction, MAD, notion with the twist of using inserted nuclear weapons already on site in the targeted nation. Because they will not just commit mass suicide for Mother Russia. So the United States survived in the 1970s, courtesy of a friendly nation, and we were not suddenly destroyed by American city after city blowing up in nuclear infernos. The important thing in the mutual assured destruction concept was that the terrorists themselves occupied a clearly defined support nation and location, which could be destroyed at will. However, with irrational foes such as we have now in the war on Islamic terrorism, no mutual assured destruction notion is a viable deterrent. There is no single viable nation or location in which to insert dead man fusing against the terrorists, or target with deliverable weapons of mass destruction. The present terrorists are not localized, but instead they are widely spread worldwide in many locations, embedded in the civilian populaces of other nations. In that case, there is only assured destruction of the nation targeted by the terrorists, if and when the terrorists successfully get enough weapons of mass destruction inserted in the targeted nation. In short, mutual assured D simply turns into assured destruction. Essentially, the terrorists are now reaching that capability, if they have not already reached it. In that case, assured destruction, the insertion phase, which is what will assure the destruction in the first place, and which can reach a very high assurance level before the operations phase is initiated, becomes the key to winning or losing, given that the terrorists have or obtained sufficient weapons of mass destruction assets to insert. Modern asymmetrical war, the Scorpion duel. We thus are back to the absolutely primitive warfare of two dueling scorpions, he who first succeeds at insertion, and then strikes his enemy hard and decisively in his vitals, is he who wins a priori. The procedure is to first ensure that one will hit the foe's vitals catastrophically, and sufficiently to destroy the entire foe himself. Then the procedure is to unleash what has been assembled, thereby destroying the foe. Hence the success of the insertion phase. Inserting the necessary weapons of mass destruction and operational teams into those vitals in advance predetermines the success of the subsequent operations phase, where one strikes on order, unleashing the weapons of mass destruction and destroying the nation's vitals and therefore destroying the foe. For the targeted Scorpion, there is no turning back or delay, once the insertion phase of the Scorpion duel begins against him. Successful insertion of the required weapons of mass destruction and weapons of mass destruction teams during a time our folks innocently think of as peacetime inevitably wins the war by destroying the penetrated adversary very shortly after the operations phase begins. In a nutshell, those two phases, insertion followed by operations, constitute the offense part of asymmetric war. And since peacetime is just the insertion phase, asymmetric war is perpetual war, whether or not shooting is ongoing. There has been little public briefing by our government on what the estimated success of the insertion phase against us has been and is now. Apparently much of the analysis is in disarray, filled with assumptions, and very short on actual definitive data. It also follows that most definitive data in this area would be highly classified, particularly to protect effective human intelligence, HUMINT, sources. Now one can appreciate VP Cheney's morose statement. Since peacetime now is just another name for insertion phase, then perpetual peace is still perpetual war in the new vernacular. So we have entered a perpetual war we have not previously known or understood. There is no real peace in the sense we think of it. There never will be any peace again, until one of the dueling scorpions is utterly destroyed. The defense part for the terrorists is to hide or defend their own vitals, their actual bases, support organizations, supply routes, troops and forces and equipment, etc. In the present asymmetric war, there are no single terrorist bases for us to just knock out decisively. We cannot win this war by simply having our troops riding out of Fortress America, meeting and defending some hostile army on some distant battlefield, and then riding back into our protected fortress again. There no longer exists such a thing as a protected Fortress America. Instead of an identifiable single army on a single foreign battlefield, the terrorist foe's vitals are hidden around the world, in many places, and in many ways. Many of them are secretly hidden right here in the United States, inserted during the insertion phase which has been ongoing for at least 20 years. In the US, we cannot hide our vitals such as refineries, pipelines, railroads, bridges, electrical power plants and long transmission lines, harbors, water supplies, food supplies, etc. Instead, we can only try to protect them against their certain attack, and try to limit the damage and destruction. The main target for the terrorists is not just our military forces, but also our civilian populace and especially our national economy, which is particularly vulnerable by the rather simple destruction of our centralized electrical power system and its primary support infrastructure. The real art of asymmetric war is to first draw most of the targeted opponent's military forces out of the protected fortress and get them scattered widely in distant locations and distant struggles. By augmenting the distant resistance, this forces the targeted nation's military forces mostly to be deployed elsewhere, leaving the internal fortress itself much less protected, and thus making it highly vulnerable. Once the major decisive action is shifted to inside the protected fortress, the urgent necessity for 1. A strong homeland defense, 2. Well-organized mass casualty treatment capabilities, and 3. Strong border defenses, sealing of the borders, and interception of insertion attempts as they occur, etc. There is also the urgent need to go after the opposing Scorpion's vitals wherever the pieces can be located and fixed in place and destroyed. Ironically, for the US these urgent needs come at a time when our HUMINT resources have largely been abandoned or nullified, by the past fascination of our intelligence community for technical widgets such as satellite photography, etc. So our ability to ferret out inserted cells and weapons of mass destruction has been sharply reduced by the intelligence community itself. Effective HUMINT takes years to get established with successful agents infiltrated into the terrorist cells and planning organizations. So not too much is going to be rapidly accomplished to resolve our HUMINT shortfalls. Much of what HUMINT is available is either from foreign sources or is due to the clandestine cooperation of much of the peaceful U.S. Muslim community, which sees this nation as its own country, and thus sees any threat to destroy the U.S. as a threat against the peaceful Muslim religion itself. To understand some of the factions and divisions of the Muslim world, the reader is referred to treatises by Williams. But the Scorpion duel is highly sensitive to being able to 1. Find the opponent's vitals, which now are the inserted assets and terrorist teams within one's own nation, and 2. Go after the Scorpion's vitals and destroy them in what are erroneously called peacetime operations. Ironically, one sets up winning or losing the asymmetric war by one's actions in peacetime. Once in an asymmetric war, peacetime is the absence of significant overt active hostilities, but the presence of fierce covert insertion and preparations for the follow-on operations phase and the knockout punches. Distant military actions, necessary but not sufficient. Hence one cannot think of winning major battles and the asymmetric war in a few months or even a few years, simply by fighting successfully on well-defined distant battlefields. Those distant conflicts and confrontations are necessary but not sufficient, a term mathematicians delight in using. Instead, one must also think of a continuing gritty, gruesome war, lasting for decades, ongoing in one's own cities and population centers and installations. One rather gradually grinds down the terrorist opponents and rather gradually uncovers and destroys the various parts of their vitals, while protecting one's own vitals as much as possible, and while rooting out everything one can of the insertions made by the foe or further attempted by the foe. Here effective HUMINT is vitally important, and our shortage of it is a grave strategic vulnerability. If one destroys the terrorist's assets and capabilities before they destroy him, one survives. If one does not succeed in doing that, one dies because the terrorists will destroy him without mercy. This is the message the Al-Qaeda and other terrorists are sending, when they behead prisoners and hostages. It is absolutely a Scorpion duel to the death. With the abrupt wake-up call of 9/11, we were suddenly confronted with the continuing and unrelenting nature of this asymmetric warfare. At least officialdom and our armed forces were confronted with it. There has been no truly adequate news briefing or educational series for the American public on such matters. The military schools of the Army, Navy, and Air Force do include education on such warfare, including highly classified courses at the top secret level. But certainly the US public still does not understand the absolute necessity for Cheney's morose statement or the full nature of the new reality of asymmetric war. Indeed, as with every other subject, the subject of asymmetry in warfare is itself a societal polarization area. Typical anti-views simply downplay the very notion of asymmetry as being nothing new or special in warfare. As one reads such treatises, it becomes crystal clear that our own strategic planners and strategic theorists themselves are often confused, simply recasting asymmetric war into what has gone before. They are not factoring in such radical developments as the Yakuza's acquisition and use of scalar electromagnetic superweapons, or the dramatic change that occurs in the theory once full strategic US destruction is a capability already in terrorists' hands, with multiple knockout blows already cocked and waiting. Asymmetric warfare simplified, an overview. Let us briefly discuss this new kind of old warfare in the most direct manner possible. The present war is a very different kind of warfare called asymmetric war. It consists of two phases: 1, the insertion phase, conducted in what we erroneously call peacetime, during which the necessary weapons of mass destruction and teams to operate and unleash them are inserted in the targeted nation's population centers, and key target areas and made ready to go, and 2, the operations phase, in which the inserted forces and assets are unleashed, thereby destroying the targeted nation. In this case, the US itself. The bulk of the target and intention is to kill US civilians and destroy critical facilities right in the US homeland, as many as possible, as efficiently as possible, and wherever and whenever possible. Secondary to the importance of population kill during the operations phase is the destruction of the targeted nation's economy, catastrophically and decisively. If the foe succeeds dramatically in accomplishing the insertion phase, the foe will almost automatically win the follow-on operations phase a priori, unless he is an utter fool. Our very real problem today is that the insertion phase has been going on for at least 2 decades, while we were literally sleeping as far as intercepting and degrading the insertion effort by any substantial degree at all. The blunt truth is that the terrorists' insertion phase has just about been successfully accomplished already. We are in grave danger of being utterly destroyed, with high assurance, in the 3-year operations phase whose first part has already begun. Compare the conduct of asymmetric warfare as analogous to orienting and setting up weapons and ammunition and target lists for a massive artillery barrage, and preparing to make a massive attack with that barrage. One first gets the artillery guns shipped into the necessary assembly areas, assembled in place, with their ammunition and crews inserted and made ready, with their target lists completed and waiting. Then one gets the vast assembly of guns and crews properly registered on their specific targets and ready to go. That's the insertion or preparation phase for a normal mass artillery bombardment. Then the assemblage of weapons in place simply fires the massive barrage on order, and that is the operations phase, exploding with suddenness and great violence right on the enemy's vitals. An important major characteristic of this normal warfare insertion phase is that it is the insertion of the delivery systems, to chosen attack positions outside the targeted area. In asymmetric war, instead of assembling all the delivery systems, cannon, rockets, missiles, etc., it is as if all the deadly ordnance was first assembled right in its target areas, inside the targeted nation, along with the necessary teams to set them off right there. In short, the delivery part of the former operations phase is pre-accomplished, before hostilities even begin. So the insertion phase gets the artillery rounds to the target during peacetime, and avoids assembling all the artillery pieces, rocket launchers, and other delivery systems necessary in the conventional war approach. Thus successful insertion in asymmetric war has already overcome one of the vagaries of standard war, the inaccuracies and mishaps caused by misdeliveries and/or losses of the delivery systems themselves prior to delivering the ordnance on the distant targets. In normal war, those misdeliveries and losses to the delivery systems directly subtract from the effects achieved on the target once the attack is initiated. In asymmetric war, the cost of misdeliveries and losses to the inserted weapons of mass destruction are paid for before the hostilities and before the attack, the operations phase, begins. So given a successful insertion, delivery system losses prior to attack do not subtract from the effectiveness of the attack results, once the attack is initiated. Once the hostile terrorists possess weapons of mass destruction and have already delivered them on site to the actual targets, the massive barrage of the operations phase is certain to destroy the targeted foe, if the terrorist leaders have any competence at all in their planning and preparations. The great advantage of the insertion phase is that it covertly prepares a great barrage where the ordnance delivery to the exact target locations has already been accomplished and its lethal effectiveness against the actual targets has therefore been assured in advance. With proper stealth and intrigue, the insertion phase can be accomplished slowly and at will, and without any extraordinary resistance being offered by the sleeping targeted nation or population. After all, it is peacetime when such clandestine insertion operations are conducted. So asymmetric war bypasses the normal overt concern with long-range delivery systems such as intercontinental ballistic missiles, strategic bombers, aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, etc. The usual giant armada of delivery systems is unnecessary, if the terrorists can successfully perform the covert insertion phase. Instead, the terrorists' major early activity is in ordnance procurement, not in building long-range delivery systems. Obviously, asymmetric war differs from normal symmetric war, and so there are definitely some new questions which must be answered. A few questions to be answered. In an asymmetric war situation, some major appropriate questions for the targeted nation are: are all the terrorists identified as to parent organization, etc.? How certain is the targeted nation that there have been no substantial omissions from its foe identification and capabilities list? Are there already effective compensatory plans in case there suddenly are uncovered additional terrorist organizations or parent organizations, and/or additional capabilities? What is the weapons of mass destruction and other clandestine weapon capability of the terrorists, their organizations, their supporting nations or groups, etc.? How certain is the targeted nation that there have been no substantial omissions from the weapons capability lists? Are there already effective compensatory plans in case there suddenly are uncovered additional weapons of mass destruction or clandestine weapon capabilities of the terrorists or their parent organizations? In view of Secretary of Defense William Cohen's seminal 1997 statement, what specifically is the capability of the terrorists to cause those volcanic eruptions, weather engineering and climate control, and initiation of earthquakes? What specifically is the nature of these strange electromagnetic weapons? What specifically are the counters to them, and specifically how effective are these counters? Further, why is so large a percentage of the government still unknowledgeable of this portion of the terrorist threat, and thus totally unprepared for it? Why has the American public not been completely and adequately briefed on these confirmed developments by the terrorists? Even though known specific foreign areas with concentrations of the terrorist organizations and/or their support groups are targeted for attack and neutralization, how much of the terrorist capabilities have been reduced by such measures? Exactly what information is officially available, and to what degree of confidence, on the missing 5 Ukraine SS-19 Stiletto intercontinental ballistic missiles, each missile with 6 nuclear warheads and each warhead of several hundred kiloton yield? To add spice to the controversy, 3 years after all the SS-19s were supposedly turned in and accounted for, another 31 physically turned up in Ukrainian silos and warehouses. One also questions what happened to the additional 230 or so missing extra nuclear warheads from the Ukraine total, to the missing Russian suitcase nuclear weapons, to the 20 suitcase nuclear weapons allegedly purchased by bin Laden, etc. What, if anything, has been done about the already inserted Russian nuclear weapons and Spetsnaz teams in our cities and population centers? What, if any, defense or countermeasures exist to prevent our destruction at some point, from these weapons alone? And again, why has not the American public been adequately briefed on such hostile capabilities and the nuclear knives already at our throats? How long has the insertion phase been ongoing? How effective has interception and neutralization or intercept of the insertion attempts been? Again, why has the American public not been briefed on these areas? What is the probable target listing compiled by the terrorists, based on their actual weapon capabilities and the degree of insertion success actually accomplished? Considering bin Laden's background in economics, and his past statements on the importance of disrupting the economics, is not the near absolute vulnerability of our centralized electrical power system our greatest single weakness, insofar as catastrophic collapse of the U.S. economy being introduced? What are the various options for the assessed terrorist preparation at the particular stage of their insertion phase, or in the near future? Which of these options have the greatest probabilities of destroying or inflicting unacceptable damage on the targeted nation? Which of these options are also matched by known or detected insertions already accomplished or attempted? Since we know that certain of our enemies, for example, the KGB FSB, understands the importance of surprise weapons or superweapons, what is our very best assessment of the probability and capability for the terrorists possessing and inserting surprise weapons or superweapons for which the targeted nation has little defense capabilities? For example, what about the surprise electromagnetic weapons the U.S. Secretary of Defense confirmed, while most of the U.S. government officials, and even our own intelligence agencies, which still largely use the totally inadequate electrical engineering model in their electromagnetic analyses, are still unaware of them? Why has not our scientific community been made fully aware of them, and put to intensive work on them? With a 3-year plan already in motion for our total destruction, and with a large key role played by the vulnerability of our electrical power system and its coming destruction, why are not our Department of Energy, National Academy of Sciences, National Science Foundation, etc. already under strong presidential orders to rearrange their energy priorities? Why have they not already corrected the terribly flawed conventional electromagnetic mess that is taught in our universities and used by our power engineers? Why are they not conducting a massive Manhattan-type project for energy from the vacuum systems to totally replace the present centralized power system? There is no other possible solution, once one recognizes that the centralized electrical power system itself is going to be destroyed with very high assurance, about 2 years from now. So why are all our scientific efforts siphoning off research funds for puerile things which will take decades and will not do the job even then? Since a great part of the problem is the Russian science of energetics and its development of superweapons, then why are our scientists still largely preoccupied with standard electrical engineering and classical electrodynamics models so horribly flawed and so archaic they should have been changed at least 3/4 of a century ago? The ease with which weapons of mass destruction were obtained by terrorists. In facing an asymmetric war launched against us, the availability of clandestine weapons of mass destruction to the terrorists, so that the weapons can be inserted, becomes a primary consideration, along with an extraordinary need to understand the new superweapons and rapidly develop counters and defenses. To see that any competent and supported terrorist organization will easily have obtained weapons of mass destruction, one should Google a search on Vaz Island in the Aral Sea, and on anthrax simultaneously. The Russian biological weapons research and production facilities were the world's best, appreciably ahead of similar facilities in the West. Hundreds of tons of very high-quality BW agents were just dumped on Vaz Island from those Russian facilities. Quoting Marshall, Malikov, and Holden, the United States and Uzbekistan are close to finalizing plans for a $6 million cleanup of a former Soviet bioweapons facility. The effort is aimed at preventing terrorists from harvesting live anthrax spores from a secret dumping ground. For nearly 60 years starting in the 1930s, the Soviets released anthrax, plague, and other weaponized pathogens on Vazrozhnyi, Resurrection, Island in the middle of the Aral Sea. In 1988, at the end of the Cold War, weaponeers buried tons of a particularly potent strain of powdered anthrax at the site, mixing the bacteria with bleach in steel drums to kill it. But several years ago testers found that some of the anthrax is still alive, and water diversions from the shrinking Aral Sea have since opened a land bridge to the once isolated island. Fearing that terrorists might try to harvest ready-made bioweapons from the site, U.S. officials agreed in October to pay for destroying the anthrax and a nearby testing facility. Actually, for quite some time, any funded terrorist organization that wished a copious supply of the finest anthrax ever made, and wished a strain already resistant to many of our treatments, could just go to Vaz Island, pay the natives a little sum, and dig up the dirt in the appropriate part of the dump site, sack it up, and carry it away. Or pay the natives a bit more, and they would dig it up and sack it for the buyer. Wash out the dirt, and one would have all one wanted of the highest grade anthrax spores ever made. Those terrorist organizations that wished a copious supply of high-grade anthrax, obtained it with relative ease. Bin Laden also obtained anthrax and other biological warfare agents from other sources. Other biological warfare agents and nuclear materials were available on Vaz Island also, in the same way. In short, any organized terrorist group in the world that wished such biological warfare agents, easily got them. And much of that weapons of mass destruction procurement will already have been covertly inserted into the U.S. The mailing of high-grade anthrax in letters sent to a few important U.S. targets after 9/11 was not a complete attack at all, nor was it so intended. The mailings were a small test attack to ascertain the amount of disruption and economic damage that could in theory be obtained by mass mailings simultaneously, through the mail in many locations, to thousands of targets. The results obtained by these little sample mailing tests showed that mass mailings of anthrax powder, in letters sent to selected high-level targets, would create chaos, extensive delay, and economic disruption. Here again one sees the coordinated planning toward our economic disruption, damage, and collapse. A simple but lethal strategic strike with horrific casualties. As is known, anthrax is highly lethal when ingested or breathed into the lungs. So a simple spray attack on a large metropolitan area, by a small two-place Cessna, with 2 men aboard, one flying and one spraying out the side, could account for from 1 to 3 million casualties, almost all of whom will die. Quoting Betts, a 1993 study by the Office of Technology Assessment concluded that a single airplane delivering 100 kilograms of anthrax spores, a dormant phase of a bacillus that multiplies rapidly in the body, producing toxins and rapid hemorrhaging by aerosol on a clear, calm night over the Washington, D.C., area could kill between 1 million and 3 million people, 300 times as many fatalities as if the plane had delivered sarin gas in amounts 10 times larger. Needless to say, the emergency treatment capabilities of the entire struck area would be completely overwhelmed. In such a case, triage becomes the official policy. Unless the treatment were started right for a civilian who inhaled the anthrax, it would be largely ineffective anyway. Triage is the classification, medical screening and sorting, of patients to determine the need and priority for treatment and transportation. Triage generally results in the patients being separated into 4 categories according to the priority for treatment that will be followed. The 4 categories are: high priority, red, patients who need immediate treatment and immediate transport in order to survive. But refer also to category 4 below. Those who need immediate treatment but cannot be expected to survive even if treated, go into category 4, black, not red. Intermediate priority, yellow, patients who will most likely survive but require treatment. Low priority, green, patients who require little or no treatment or whose treatment and transportation can be delayed. Lowest priority, black, patients who cannot be expected to survive even with treatment, those who cannot be expected to survive in a mass casualty situation, and those whose vital signs are absent. In a mass casualty situation with very scarce supplies and nowhere near sufficient mass treatment capabilities, triage becomes necessary and officially applies. That means casualties classified in the black, lowest priority, category, such as patients already showing the anthrax symptoms, and therefore almost certain to die with or without treatment, will just be set aside, made as comfortable as possible, and allowed to die. There is very little to be gained by treating them, even if given every treatment available, almost all of the patients in this category would die anyway. With triage sorting, the very scarce and precious antibiotics and treatments will be reserved for those who have at least a better chance of surviving, once treated. This is one of the harsh decisions, formerly reserved for military forces in the field under desperate circumstances, which will have to be made for our civilian populace and wounded as well. Such desperate decisions are further discussed in Section 32. A force amplifier not considered by Western analysts. By use of scalar interferometry, which the Yakuza already has and uses, or quantum potential weapons, which the Yakuza does not have, but the KGB FSB does, it is possible to trick the immune system of each person in the targeted populous area so that his or her immune system erroneously detects invasion by, say, 24 different pathogens at once. This is done by simply placing the electromagnetic shadow disease engines or precursor engines for those specific pathogenic conditions into the bodies in the area. Given this deliberate stimulation and the resulting alarming detection, the deceived immune system desperately spreads its finite assets across those detected 24 invading pathogens. The immune system reacts to what it detects, not necessarily to what is actually occurring. And it detects the interaction of faint precursor engines for the specific 24 diseases, deliberately radiated into the body and thus interacting with its cellular mass. Such a spread immune system is then just about totally vulnerable to any real attack by any normal opportunistic real pathogen in the area, because it can marshal few if any additional resources. In a bizarre way, this is a new form of asymmetric biological warfare, designed to disable the immune systems of the targeted populace, dramatically increasing the effectiveness of the real biological warfare pathogen being introduced. In the absence of deliberate biological warfare pathogen attack, the result of spreading the immune systems in a targeted area is an extraordinarily heightened vulnerability of a very weakly radiated populace to ordinary opportunistic infectious pathogens in the populace's environment, to which the humans in that populace are physically exposed. There are always such opportunistic pathogens in one's environment, but usually the immune system can handle most of them with a shrug. But the deceived living body with a spread immune system will be quickly and easily attacked by multiple environmental pathogens, unable to effectively exist, and without the organism's usual immune system's protective resistance. That living body with its spread immune system will shortly develop a whole cocktail mix of opportunistic diseases. If the immune spreading intensity is lowered a bit, then only a percentage of the persons with the effect will develop the cocktail mix of diseases syndrome. If the immune spreading is lowered even further, then only those persons already having additional immune system lowering will be affected. This spreading of the immune system is what was deliberately done to generate the Gulf War disease in some of our soldiers in the First Gulf War. The immune systems of our soldiers in certain areas, already weakened a bit by multiple vaccinations, were spread by hostile forces, as a test to see if our scientists and analysts recognized what was being done. The immune spreading signals were deliberately lowered to the point that none of the French troops, who had refused to take the mix of vaccinations we administered our own forces, and which do reduce the ability of the immune system for some weeks, developed the cocktail mix diseases and syndrome, while some of the US, Canadian, and British forces who did have lowered immune systems as a result of their vaccinations did develop the cocktail mix of diseases called the Gulf War syndrome. The natives in the area had not had their immune systems lowered by vaccinations, and so no change occurred in that populace. Our scientists did not understand it at all. They did not understand it then, they do not understand it to this day, and they will not understand it tomorrow unless forcibly ordered to meticulously consider and experimentally investigate what happens when immune systems are indeed spread in the fashion being advanced, and when specific tailoring to select the targeted populace subset is also used. Our scientists still have not comprehended the higher group symmetry electromagnetic mechanisms by which health and disease changes in personnel in the U.S. Embassy in Moscow were induced during several decades of microwave radiation by the Soviet Union. They do not intend to further try to understand it, and they have simply buried it. It does not matter that 3 U.S. ambassadors eventually died as a result, or that hundreds of persons were made sick or developed real diseases. Also, our scientists do not know how to properly investigate and explain the directly related Kazanachayev experiments, nor do they intend to do so. Electromagnetic biological warfare, terrorism force amplifier not considered by analysts. Not comprehending immune system spreading or how it is induced, our medical scientists certainly have no knowledge of the electromagnetic use of specific precursor engines for a specific disease, such as anthrax, to directly induce the disease in targeted bodies in an entire great area. Instead of the passive measure of immune system spreading, the same electromagnetic weapons can directly transport and induce the precursor engines for developing the anthrax conditions in the bodies in a large targeted populace, such as the greater Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, which was the area considered in the referenced government study involving a spray anthrax attack. For example, the exact structural pattern of the necessary disease induction engines for anthrax can be directly gathered or recorded from the electromagnetic emissions of sickened human cells or humans with anthrax. Such ordinary electromagnetic carrier emissions do contain those specific anthrax electromagnetic disease engines as info-LD Whittaker patterns. Particularly in the infrared and ultraviolet range, and particularly when both the infrared and ultraviolet ranges are considered simultaneously, that is, when a full harmonic interval of radiation is considered, and especially when that harmonic brackets the visible spectrum and the targeted organism is in the dark so that the visible light spectrum interference is removed. Our scientific leaders have little or no understanding of the Kazanachayev experiments, and most simply are not interested in understanding them since it would require thinking in terms of a higher group symmetry electrodynamics, not the common old electrical engineering. Hence they do not even conceive of the result of electromagnetic enhancement of a strike by a biological warfare agent such as anthrax, or of electromagnetic biological warfare, where the disease itself is induced in the body by the exact disease engine that pathogens carry, but mostly without the intervening physical carrier. This direct induction of the specific disease condition via tailored induction of the appropriate specific electromagnetic disease engines in the bodies of the targeted populace, is another gigantic force amplifier that can be either used alone or in conjunction with the previous force amplifier of spread immune systems. The US has no defense against it, nor do our medical science leaders and establishments intend to develop such defenses. As a force amplifier, the combination of immune spreading and electromagnetic biological warfare induction of a single disease can increase the overall casualties from an anthrax attack by from 5 to 10 times what would be obtained by the basic anthrax spray attack of physical anthrax spores alone. Further, our own physics of the vacuum already prescribes the basis for precursor engines and their use, including their use in induction or augmentation of disease, or in elimination of disease. Quoting Atchison, vacuum polarization, in general, alters the effective force law. Forces, in quantum field theory, are understood as being due to the exchange of virtual quanta. In the case of QCD and QFD, a crucial new feature is that the force field quanta themselves carry the charge of the force field, that is, it is as if the photon of electromagnetism carried electromagnetic charge. The upper limit of the force amplification, more simply, the gain, is of course the limit entailed by the size of the targeted population. The combination of the two force amplifiers, coupled with the actual spray attack, can effectively infect and sicken almost the entire exposed population, with nearly the entire population becoming casualties and dying. In a mass casualty situation, the presence of these force amplifiers will also move the vast percentage of the stricken casualties to the black triage category 4. They will thus receive no treatment, but will just be allowed to die. The use of the force amplifiers means that a much greater percentage will be black and allowed to die under normal triage rules. But our own National Institutes of Health, NIH, and medical science community, and our own intelligence community in that area, are simply not interested. Nor have they apparently done even elementary homework in the area of higher group symmetry electrodynamics. Most do not even recognize the term. Nor have they funded any specific higher group symmetry electrodynamics research in the area, outside the terribly crippled U1, electromagnetics and electrical engineering, even though these disease force amplifier capabilities of higher group symmetry electrodynamics have already been repeatedly demonstrated, first by the KGB against the U.S. Embassy in Moscow in the former Soviet Union and then by the KGB FSB in Russia today. Sadly, most of our present scientific medical research is almost a vast wasteland as far as any study of 1. Scalar interferometry use in disease induction or force amplification, 2. the mechanism used in the decades-long electromagnetic induction of health changes and diseases, resulting in the deaths of 3 U.S. ambassadors, in the former U.S. Embassy in Moscow, during the long so-called microwave radiation of the embassy. 3. The spreading of immune systems of a targeted population, and 4. Electromagnetic induction of specific disease in a targeted populace via the induction of the specific precursor engine for that specific disease. Further, our medical scientists' knowledge of higher group symmetry electrodynamics appears to be nil. Worse, the medical science community appears to have no concern at all over its own total lack of knowledge in such higher forms of electrodynamics. Possibly, a part of this nonchalance is due to the important financial exchanges between some National Institute of Health scientists and outside industry. But as a step in the right direction, National Institute of Health is now imposing stricter rules on its scientists with respect to their consulting to, or employment by, outside drug companies, which in turn are receiving payments from National Institute of Health funding. The agency has even proposed banning all its scientists from doing any consulting work with drug companies for a year, while the agency's investigations continue. Let us fervently hope that this cleanup continues, so that National Institute of Health really does again function as an independent government agency dedicated to the benefit of the American public, not the big drug companies. At this point, every little bit helps. Example, release in the populace of US-made biological warfare mycoplasma. Sometimes, there also appears to have been collusion between the NIH and rather illegal, and unethical, testing on human citizens without their consent. As an example, our NIH leaders are still doing absolutely nothing at all about the modified mycoplasma biological warfare agent that our own biological warfare researchers developed in the 1950s to burrow inside red cells, feed off their hemoglobin shells, and dramatically decrease the oxygen transport capability of the red cells in the blood. This modified biological warfare mycoplasma agent was developed, then it was thinned by about 2,000 times and sprayed into the populace and the environment by combined US/Canadian teams in the 1950s in Canada. It was also sprayed by US agencies in Florida. These sprayings resulted in passing the deliberately manufactured serious biological warfare agent into the mosquito population and thence into the human population of North America. Indeed, in the cooperative joint US-Canada program, the modified mycoplasma agent was deliberately implanted in mosquitoes by the government researchers, and those mosquitoes were then released, to ascertain the spread effectiveness of the mosquitoes as disease vectors. That's rather like firing some machine gun bursts at random into a very large crowd, to determine the average pattern of hits and kills. As a result, in Canada the present author personally contracted that specific biological warfare disease. Courtesy of our own biological warfare scientists and the inane directing officials who thought that diluting the biological warfare mycoplasma agent spray rendered the mess safe. While in the U.S. Army, living in Quebec, and stationed at the Canadian Armament Research and Development Establishment, CARDE, in 1966–68. I survived only by the Herculean efforts of the French doctors in Quebec, who opened both the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity and moved the internal organs around for about 3 hours, aerating the tissues thoroughly and unknowingly killing the exposed surface mycoplasma. After that oxygenation of the tissues, the mycoplasma already burrowed inside the red blood cells survived and then went dormant, slowly increasing over the next 3 decades. Left with slowly increasing chronic fatigue syndrome over the next 33-year period, I even served a tour in Vietnam and still no one knew what was wrong. No medical tests or examinations showed what it was. Then in spring 2001, resurgence of the mycoplasma generated runaway heart fibrillation and a heart attack. When the terrorist attack of 9/11 struck a stunned America, I was struggling to stay alive from the heart attack, runaway heart fibrillation, and significant hypoxia from my own prior encounter with a terrorist BW attack. A colleague who checks on me about once a year then called. He has been in many deep black programs, most of which did not officially exist. He also has the equivalent of a PhD in biochemistry. He knew of the Mycoplasma biological warfare agent development program and the Mycoplasma spraying in Florida and Canada. He immediately recognized that my strange Canadian malady contracted in 1968 was actually that biological warfare Mycoplasma. He also told me where to get definitive information on the web and from Senate hearings, and voila! The puzzle was solved. Finally, a specific test confirmed the chronic biological warfare Mycoplasma infection in December 2001 after my 33 years of puzzlement, doubt, and slowly increasing physical debilitation. The treatment was a year, 2002, on antibiotics, which did annihilate the mycoplasma that were hiding in the red blood cells. But it did not and cannot undo the damage already done throughout my body during those 33 years. In such case, one has permanent chronic fatigue, cannot walk very far or stand very long, and one takes blood thinner for the rest of one's life to try to prevent strokes and blood clots. One also takes medication to try to control the heart fibrillation and stay alive, in addition to thinning the blood to hopefully prevent clotting. The eventual expectation is to go on a pacemaker, then eventually have another heart attack or stroke, finishing the process. The problem is that, if one takes the medication necessary to control the heart fibrillation, it also reduces the volume of blood pumping, which places one back in hypoxia, leading to strokes and/or heart attacks. If one does not take the fibrillation control medication, one reverts back into hypoxia from the fibrillation, which leads to strokes and/or heart attacks. With the usual treatment by well-meaning heart doctors, one is damned if one does and damned if one doesn't. They do not and will not prescribe remedial oxygen, since they do not consider mycoplasma to even be involved in heart problems and attacks. The only way out of the dilemma is to take the medicine to defeat the fibrillation, and also take oxygen to prevent the resulting hypoxia. So I take remedial oxygen and pay for it on my own volition, since the heart doctors know nothing of the modified BW mycoplasma and they do not wish to hear of it. Nor does one's insurance company, Medicare, the Veterans Administration, etc. By taking one's own remedial oxygen, one remains just barely above the hypoxia zone, at least until something else unexpected occurs to make things worse. That way one remains alive a while longer, perhaps even for a few more years. Even so, one has acquired a delayed death sentence just waiting to happen at any moment. And one remains with severe chronic fatigue. Perhaps then it is understandable that the present author has a very personal interest in that particular biological warfare mycoplasma disease and that set of incidents, and in the continuing gross failure of the National Institute of Health to acquaint heart doctors in the US of that nefarious program and what happened. Today there is a direct involvement of this biological warfare modified mycoplasma in a significant fraction of heart disease patients, chronic fatigue syndrome patients, etc. Most of the citizens of the US and Canada already have that biological warfare organism infecting their bodies, like a ticking time bomb waiting to erupt perhaps many years later. To this day, very few hospitals and medical clinics have the very specific type of mycoplasma test required to test for the modified biological warfare version. Apparently the National Institute of Health considers any contact on this problem, or a similar biological warfare problem a hot potato to be handled by their policy section, that is, spin control section. Bluntly put, the attitude often seems more concerned with political control than with saving the lives of countless American citizens who unknowingly continue to be afflicted with that biological warfare modified mycoplasma, continue to die of its complications, or are disabled and their lives shortened because of it. National Institute of Health political orientation seems to be one of the major shortcomings of the US in its required defenses against the biological warfare aspects of asymmetric warfare. It also appears that the National Institute of Health directly participated and cooperated with the US biological warfare organizations that developed and unleashed the biological warfare mycoplasma in the first place. If so, the misdirected attention of the National Institute of Health to cover up will probably continue, and that will help guarantee much of the success and increased mass casualties resulting from professional terrorist biological warfare strikes against the US populace in the near future. Ironically, that nefarious modified mycoplasma is a strange kind of biological warfare force amplifier that the Soviet biological warfare weapons labs initially developed to soften us up. Eerily, they themselves did not have to introduce it into the North American populace. Instead, we ourselves developed it and, in what has to be some of the most stupid biological warfare actions of all time, we deliberately unleashed it into our own environment and against our own North American populace. In comic relief, one is tempted to remark that with friends like that, who needs enemies? Effective, quick mass casualty treatments will not be developed by the U.S. medical research agencies. Sadly, in this present asymmetric warfare problem, we are forced to conclude that the National Institute of Health and the CDC will not be doing the research necessary to develop adequate response therapies and means for quick, effective treatment of mass biological warfare casualties. None of the associated agencies appears likely to develop anything innovative in this area, particularly they are not going to quickly develop a portable higher group symmetry electromagnetic treatment unit that could effectively treat and cure most of those millions of casualties that will result in our cities in the future. As we mentioned, there is a precursor electromagnetic engine for every disease and every debilitated condition of the living body. That means there is also a precursor electromagnetic anti-engine that can be formed, amplified, and introduced into the diseased patient and that will reverse the disease condition in situ and cure the disease. Because the anti-engine is electromagnetic and can therefore be amplified, the treatment period can be reduced to as low as 5 minutes of non-ionizing radiation containing the amplified specific disease engines. The body's potentials and fields thus have the anti-engines kindled inside them, and after the treatment is removed, the body's own activated fields and potentials, at every level, now continue diminishing and destroying the disease engine, and reversing the patient's condition back to normal. Further, anti-engine patterns for a variety of expected and known biological warfare agents can be developed and incorporated into such treatment machines, and the machine can then just be switched to the appropriate anti-engine required to treat the patient's biological warfare condition, destroy the patient's specific disease anti-engine and reverse the patient's condition back to normal. As a further example of U.S. medical orientation, in 1998 a close colleague and the present author tried very hard to get the National Institute of Health, and other federal agencies, to develop a portable unit for such electromagnetic mass casualty treatment in a crash U.S. government program, to save millions of lives in the coming asymmetric warfare debacle. The mechanism to be used was an electromagnetic mechanism for generating an amplified anti-engine for a specific biological warfare-induced disease. By radiating the body with the amplified anti-engine, it overrides the actual disease engine, eroding away the disease engine and the disease along with it, and reversing the physical condition back to normal. Once developed, this would be a therapy far superior to anything presently developed or proposed officially, and it could result in saving millions of American lives. The National Institute of Health, Department of Defense, United States Air Force, CDC, and other federal agencies had not the slightest notion of what we were talking about, and we never got out of the policy section at National Institute of Health, even with the assistance of Congressman Bud Kramer. Not a single scientist in any of those government agencies even called to discuss the proposal and its novel physical mechanism, and apparently none checked the hard references we cited from the French medical science literature where the basic mechanism had been proven. None of those agencies had the foggiest notion that the decades-long microwave radiation of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow already demonstrated the use of higher group symmetry electrodynamic disease engine signals to directly generate health changes and diseases at will. They had no concept of the use of appropriate amplified anti-signals to reverse and cure illnesses, or that an extended electromagnetic can be developed to either induce or cure specific diseases to order as one desires. They certainly do not comprehend the higher group symmetry operation of the human cellular regenerative system which is responsible for the body's healing and have not gone much further than Becker's brilliant seminal studies of that system. Unfortunately, Becker's work was limited by his use only of U1 electrodynamics. Even so, he almost deciphered the control operation of the cellular regenerative system. Otherwise, Becker would have had the anti-engine electromagnetic healing process then and there. His electromagnetic healing method for otherwise intractable bone fractures survived and is still utilized in some hospitals from time to time. To show what simple potential, voltage, across an otherwise intractable fracture can do, it affects the red cells that arrive, reconverting those red cells to a suitable precursor cell, more primitive, earlier cell. The cell shucks its hemoglobin and grows a nucleus. This is dedifferentiation, and it is generated by the appositive longitudinal Whittaker waves that constitute the voltage, acting as pump waves in the nonlinear optical sense. The pumped bone fracture site has thus become a pumped phase conjugate mirror site, with the input or signal wave being the specific physical disorder's engine. In accord with nonlinear optical pumping theory, the energy of the pumping waves then establishes an amplified anti-engine or phase conjugate replica signal. This amplified signal, anti-engine, will then quickly reverse the entire physical red blood cell back along its past travel through time. In its past short life, red cells only live about 3 months. Hence the red cell dedifferentiates back to an earlier stage. The delta condition in the fracture site involves bone cells. So the red cell is redifferentiated by the pumping to move forward to the type of cell that makes cartilage. Then it further redifferentiates yet again to the type of cell that makes bone, and that cellular material is deposited in the fracture site, healing it. In simple language, that is precisely how Becker's bone healing electromagnetic treatment works. The point is, that process and its proven success already proves the entire capability to treat and reverse diseases and physical injury conditions by a peculiar variation of nonlinear optical pumping, using the disease or disorder engine as the input signal, producing an amplified anti-engine, and this anti-engine forcibly interacting upon any and all aspects of the cells and the physical body to reverse the situation and restore the body to health. But the National Institute of Health was not interested, even though the elements of this process had also been resoundingly proven by the Priori group in France, in rigorous work funded by the French government. Eventually the National Institute of Health just shipped the entire package over to the Department of Defense, to whom we had already sent the package anyway, because the package mentioned the Gulf War syndrome and that was the purview of the Department of Defense. In short, the NIH wasn't interested in what Gulf War syndrome really was, or in curing it either. So unless it involves drugs or some form of ionizing radiation treatment or some such, our own NIH was not and is not interested in a proven, demonstrated cure for cancer and other dread diseases, accomplished in France in the 1960s and early 70s, and already rigorously reported in the French medical science literature but resoundingly suppressed today. For that matter, one can check the same US agencies for their understanding or lack of it of the mechanism that induced the Gulf War disease, and one will find their understanding is still almost zero. One can check their knowledge of what induced the diseases and health changes at the US Embassy in Moscow over so many years, and one will find it is still zero. The entire US medical science community is still using an archaic old seriously flawed classical electromagnetics of the material luminiferous ether, rather than the more modern higher group symmetry electromagnetics of mass-free space-time. Consequently it is far more concerned with the immune system's responses which physically kill the bad guys, or harsh drugs which chemically kill the bad guys, rather than the cellular control system responses which actually accomplish all healing within the body after the bad guys are already dead. The immune system and the drugs do not actually heal anything, not even the immune system's own damaged cells. The fundamental orientation of American medicine is on physically attacking and killing the pathogens which transport the disease engines, rather than on how the damaged body regenerates its own cells and reverses its own disease engine via use of higher group symmetry electrodynamics. This strongly prejudices and canalizes our own medical science development. It also makes us extraordinarily vulnerable to the coming mass casualty attacks in our cities and population centers. Indeed, the entire U.S. electrical engineering community itself does not realize that it doesn't even know or apply what electrodynamics in mass-free space is. There is not a single electrical engineering professor or text that calculates an actual E field in space, although all purport to do so. Instead, rigorously they calculate the indicated point intensity of the ongoing effect of interaction of the force-free E field in space with charged static matter. This ongoing interaction generates the force field E in that charged matter while that interaction is ongoing. Their own conventional electromagnetism electrical engineering model never gets out of the assumed charged matter and its force fields, those ongoing interactions that are occurring, and the model never expresses the force-free E field in mass-free space at all. In the face of such appalling scientific ignorance for more than a century, it is little wonder that our nation is so terribly behind in understanding what can be done and is being done by the terrorists with the primary, precursor, electrodynamics in free space, before its interaction with matter. In short, our analysts have not comprehended Soviet energetics for a half-century, and they have no intention of comprehending it now, even though it is being used against us. So we really do not have mass casualty treatment capabilities that will be effective and that could be developed. Our national agencies adamantly are not going to develop the proven priori-type electromagnetic treatment or really get to the bottom of Becker's anomalous electromagnetic bone fracture healing, because such would not be common old electrical engineering. Our scientific leaders are not going to demand the correction of that terribly flawed electrical engineering model, which is our single greatest national vulnerability and the one that is being capitalized upon by coordinated terrorism and asymmetric warfare to destroy us within the next 3 years. We are going to unnecessarily lose millions of American lives, of many of our citizens who become casualties. Now most of them will just get triage black category 4 treatment, which is no treatment at all. Those future wounded Americans would not have to die if such electromagnetic countermeasures were intensely developed in portable treatment machines and massively deployed. We are describing a vast force amplifier for the defending nation that has been targeted and very seriously struck. But it is a force amplifier that our own government community and scientific community do not wish to even hear about. Never mind the actual experimental proof of the type methodology proposed, already in the hard French medical literature, accomplished by the Priori group in the 1960s and early 1970s. The understanding of the Priori mechanism does not exist in National Institute of Health or in our entire medical community, which, as far as medical electromagnetic is concerned, has not yet gotten out of the terribly flawed century-old electrical engineering with its serious foundations errors. Impact of immune system spreading. If immune system spreading is also simultaneously applied by scalar interferometry to the targeted populace receiving the biological warfare strikes, then one must multiply the expected casualty results from a spray anthrax attack by a factor of 3. This means that, in the referenced U.S. government study, instead of 1 to 3 million casualties, one would have from 3 to 9 million casualties. That's in one city area, from one professional attack by a small two-place aircraft, with one person flying and one person spraying, using a common little agricultural sprayer, and spraying out 100 kilograms of anthrax spores distributed over the area. Almost all of those 3 to 9 million persons contracting the disease and becoming casualties would die. They have little chance even if treated, and their automatic black triage category 4 status will see to it. In other words, with the possession of augmenting weapons such as scalar interferometers in the hands of the Yakuza, the terrorists have achieved a terrible force amplifier capability that parallels the destruction capabilities of a modern state's ICBMs, strategic bombers, nuclear subs, aircraft carriers, etc. All without a single intercontinental ballistic missile, strategic bomber, nuclear sub, or aircraft carrier. So now one considers, say, 3 large U.S. city areas hit just about simultaneously by effective anthrax spray attacks, and one sees the grim picture very probably in store for us. To be conservative, we assume 1 million casualties in each city as the baseline achieved by the spray attack pathogen itself. Thus a total of 3 million casualties are obtained in the 3 strikes. However, if immune system spreading were also incorporated simultaneously, the casualties in each city will reach, say, 3 million, almost all of whom will die. That is a total of 9 million American casualties in the 3 cities. And almost all of those wounded will die. If, in addition to the immune system spreading, some supporting scalar interferometers are also inducing the same anthrax disease pattern via electromagnetic biological warfare, that's perhaps 5 million casualties in each city, for a total of 15 million American casualties, almost all of whom will die. If the intensity of the scalar interferometry disease induction is further increased, that's perhaps 18 million or so total American casualties in those 3 city areas, almost all of whom will die. Here one directly sees the transition from the kind of estimates our own analysts usually make for biological warfare agent attacks, to estimates that show the more maximum risk of massive strategic destruction and even knockout by the same front-line terrorist troops, due to the advent of the supporting scalar interferometers, immune spreading, and electromagnetic biological warfare. All that would be caused by 6 men, 3 light 2-place Cessna-type aircraft, 3 little agricultural sprayers which can be purchased at any Home Depot or similar store, and 300 kilograms of anthrax spores from Vaz Island. And, in the 9, 15, and 18 million casualty cases some force amplification support from 3 or more scalar interferometers. In addition, the contamination of those large built-up population areas will force additional harsh spraying of decontamination agents, killing many thousands more of our own populace. Note also that the effectiveness of the decontamination sprays are also seriously hampered if the scalar interferometers continue their electromagnetic biological warfare anthrax induction. None of these kinds of force amplifier effects are presently known or taken into account by our analysts and our intelligence agencies. The real action fact that should be concentrated upon by our medical science agencies, is that most of those casualties are going to wind up as triage black category 4 patients. Most are not even going to be treated, and so almost all of them will die. Also, we point out the amplified disease anti-engine treatment approach is capable of rapidly causing the reversal of the disease, even in those who presently will sadly be assigned to triage black category 4. Now most of those will fall within triage red category 1. There is simply nothing else out there that will produce such a dramatic savings of human lives, and perhaps the saving of our nation itself. Impact of smallpox release. It is almost inevitable that the terrorists also obtain smallpox biological warfare agents. So could anyone who wanted it, who had guts and money. Reliable information already confirms that the terrorists obtained many biological warfare agents, including smallpox. One just went into the collapsed Soviet territories, to the actual biological warfare labs, and bought it at the time. Or one got it from North Korea. Or one just hired very desperate Russian smallpox biological warfare scientists who urgently needed to support their families. Or one got it from Vaz Island. The collapsing Soviet state was unable to pay salaries etc. to scientists and generals and soldiers for protracted periods. In desperation to get money to survive, extreme measures were taken by those scientists and generals and soldiers. Anything there that one wished to buy could be bought, including even a nuclear submarine? See Luna's book for that incident. Among other things, these items that were available included supplies of smallpox agent, and the Soviet biological warfare smallpox specialists themselves. Once smallpox is unleashed in any major city on the planet, it will eventually kill almost 1/3 the present human population. Quoting Garrett, if the smallpox virus were released today, the majority of the world's population would be defenseless, and given the virus' 30% kill rate, nearly 2 billion people would die. Smallpox is almost certainly going to be released against the US populace. The Yakuza and other terrorist organizations will see to it, with smallpox toxin supplies almost certainly already inserted in the US and waiting. As an intellectual exercise, we leave it to the reader to ponder the impact of a few limited smallpox releases in our cities combined with simultaneous wide usage of the force amplifiers, immune system spreading and electromagnetic biological warfare smallpox induction, previously discussed. The impact is not pleasant. The grim nuclear problem. One can also see the damage that can and will be done by dirty weapons, surrounding ordinary high explosives with nuclear materials, causing spreading nuclear fallout in selected dense city populaces. But there is another even grimmer side of the story. When the Soviet Union collapsed economically, many nuclear weapons were made available on the black market, and sold to the highest bidder. Some 200 or more nuclear warheads for missiles came up missing from the Ukraine alone. Quoting Communist Party leader Petro Simonenko, out of 2,400 nuclear warheads which were on Ukrainian territory, the withdrawal of only 2,200 warheads has been verified. The fate of the remaining 200 warheads is unknown. Further, in 1996 Alexander Lebed, then Boris Yeltsin's national security advisor, reported that some 100 suitcase-sized Russian nuclear bombs were missing. In Adonibrook, some Russian officials denied the existence of such weapons, while others confirmed their existence. The charges and counter-charges faded away, and nothing was ever resolved. All those weapons were in fact sold on the nuclear black market. Guess who bought them, and guess where many of them have been inserted already, waiting to go, along with the trained teams to detonate them on command. It is almost certain that bin Laden and Al-Qaeda succeeded in purchasing some of the Russian stray nuclear weapons. Other terrorists such as the Yakuza and the Aum Shinrikyo almost certainly purchased some of them also. Terrorist efforts to obtain further bomb-grade material such as highly enriched uranium, HU, have continued. Quoting Bun and Weir, the 41 heavily armed, suicidal terrorists who seized hundreds of hostages at a Moscow theater in 2002 reportedly considered seizing the Kurchatov Institute instead. A site with enough highly enriched uranium for dozens of nuclear weapons. Al-Qaeda has been actively seeking nuclear material for a bomb and has strong connections to Chechen terrorist groups. Bun and Weir also point out that more than 130 research reactors in dozens of countries still operate with HU fuel, and many have no more security than a night watchman and a chain-link fence. Pakistan's heavily guarded nuclear stockpiles face huge threats, from both insiders and outsiders, including large remnants of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in the country. Comprehensive U.S.-funded security upgrades have been completed for only 22% of Russia's potential nuclear bomb material. Upgrades for tens of thousands of bombs worth of material are still incomplete. At this moment, no one knows how many Russian nuclear weapons have gone missing and were sold on the world black market by desperate unpaid Russian generals and soldiers doing whatever had to be done to get money to feed their families. No one knows how many Russian nuclear weapons are still going missing and being sold on the nuclear black market. Because the terrorists wanted them and had the funds, and because the Russian generals and soldiers sold them to someone, it does not take a rocket scientist to understand that the two parties almost certainly got together and did business. For more specific information, see Williams. The Al-Qaeda has quietly confirmed to the Arab world that it, the Al-Qaeda, already has inserted 7 nuclear weapons in major U.S. cities, and some of the weapons were 200 kilotons. At least one U.S. author has assessed the Al-Qaeda as having nuclear weapons in the U.S. I personally suspect the actual number that has been inserted by the Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations combined, is about double that figure at least. Bin Laden apparently bought some 20 suitcase nuclear weapons himself, using funding obtained from the Arab world and/or drug production in Afghanistan. One also reiterates that the KGB-FSB faction which controls the Russian superweapons and controlled the leasing and transfer of scalar interferometry technology to the Yakuza Aum Shinrikyo, also controls the previously inserted Russian nuclear weapons in American cities as well as the Spetsnaz teams with them. During this orchestrated 2-year period we have now entered, somewhere in the United States at least some of those weapons are very probably going to be transferred or sold to the Yakuza Aum Shinrikyo, and perhaps a few will go to other well-organized groups such as Al-Qaeda. As another example, the former Soviet Union also probably inserted anthrax and smallpox agents into the US, along with dispersed teams to unleash the biological warfare agents on command. If so, those assets are also still here, waiting for the order to move. It seems highly probable that at least some of these biological warfare weapons caches will also be released to the terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, for use in the coordinated coming attacks. So in addition to the biological warfare threat, somewhere between 14 and 40 already inserted hostile nuclear weapons probably form the minimum nuclear weapons pool available to the coordinated terrorists during this 2-year period. At least that would appear to be a reasonable estimate. We accent that this estimated nuclear weapons pool has, with high probability, already been inserted on site in the US. This is another startling capability of the present terrorists to deliver a resounding strategic nuclear knockout blow against the United States, without ever firing a missile or launching a strategic bomber. Anyway, this and additional developments are what is really going on and building up in the war on terrorism. The great battle of that war will apparently begin within 2 years from now, right here in the United States. The orders will be given during this 2-year period we are now in. The orders will gradually unleash these terrorist assets, and then their initially sporadic attacks will be deliberately increased, with maximum effort at the very end of the 2nd year and over the first half of that following 3rd year. Harshness of the terrible decontamination problem. No one has a good solution to decontaminating mass metropolitan areas, that have been destroyed or heavily damaged and that are dramatically contaminated with nuclear fallout. Neither does anyone have a solution for decontaminating the distant large nuclear fallout areas surrounding those devastated cities after the nuclear detonations. One need only point out the similar terrible task of decontaminating a large city, such as Washington, D.C. in that government study, once the city has been sprayed en masse with anthrax by the terrorists. Yes, there are some chemical sprays that will kill the anthrax spores, else they last for a century or more, apparently. But these sprays are very harsh. To spray a civilian populace and area with them is to unavoidably kill a certain number of one's own sprayed civilian populace. So far as is known, there are no similar sprays available that will kill the contaminating nuclear radiation. Now note the extreme harshness of the coming decisions necessary in asymmetric war. In military war, high-level commanders have always had to make very agonizing decisions. For example, suppose one is an army commander, and has, say, a dozen divisions under his control. Suppose on his war front he is attacked by overwhelmingly superior forces, and breakthrough and destruction of his army is imminent. The commander will have to deliberately sacrifice, say, 2 divisions, that's 36,000 men, by hurling them into the teeth of the attacking forces, to temporarily halt and delay the attack momentum while those 2 divisions fight and die. They will be ground up just like hamburger meat, but that delays the enemy onslaught for a precious short time. That desperately bought short delay time gives the army commander the chance to get his other 10 divisions out of there, and back to prepared defensive positions, to live to fight another day. This way, he saves the bulk of his army, by deliberately sacrificing those 2 divisions. The point is, military commanders have always had to agonize and sometimes deliberately send large numbers of men under their control to their certain deaths. The soldiers sent on such missions also knew it at the time they received their orders, and they knew that they went to their certain deaths. Any fool can make a military decision when there is a good option and a bad option. But when there are only 2 bad options, one is forced to decide for the least worst of the options, even though it entails the deliberate sacrifice of lives to save others. Now the battlefield is our own cities, and the targeted force is our own civilian populace. That same type of least worst decision necessity falls now on the sacrifice of some of our own civilians. Some commander at high level, probably the president himself, will have to assess the situation as so desperate that multiple decontamination sprayings of the anthrax-contaminated area and populace are absolutely necessary, to prevent spreading mass destruction by anthrax carried to other areas, and resulting in the deaths of many millions more. So such an order will have to be given, agonizingly, to spray multiple times, necessary to neutralize the anthrax with a good probability of success. Each massive spraying might kill perhaps an additional 5,000 US civilians. Heartbreakingly, these will be the most defenseless and helpless of our citizens, and the ones we would strongly wish to defend to the death with our very lives and with every heartbeat in our breasts. The most vulnerable group will largely consist of persons with hampered breathing or vulnerable immune systems. The old, the feeble, babies, the sick, nursing home occupants, etc. It has been said that war is hell, and indeed it is. Asymmetric war resoundingly brings that hell home to our civilian populace. Formerly our troops have mostly ridden out of the protected U.S. fortress castle, to a foreign land, and fought the war over there, with our civilian populace largely immune and shielded from the horrors of such fighting, particularly when the fighting is intense. Now, in addition to our involvement in foreign places, in asymmetrical warfare the major battleground is right here in our own cities, because the major target being attacked by the hostile forces is our civilian populace, including our aged, the infirm, women and children, babies, etc. These devils who are our foes believe that, if they can kill lots of American civilians, babies, etc., they personally acquire a very high religious status from God Almighty. In short, we are up against a fanatical, irrational foe, who has also unfortunately had 2 decades or more of almost unrestricted access into the United States, to insert the necessary weapons of mass destruction assets for this final great jihad against us in our cities and homeland. This final great jihad, in the operations phase fought inside our cities and nation, is what is really coming upon us. This is the coming horrible nature of the struggle. We are actually in a clash to the death between civilizations and cultures. Quoting Sieb, the far bigger question is whether the US is engaged in a historic clash of civilizations with the Islamic world. The US has reached no consensus on a strategy for dealing with a clash of civilizations. Sieb further states, the bin Laden goal isn't simply to humiliate the US. Nor is it to overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia, or Egypt, or Jordan. The goal is to eliminate those governments. In fact, to eliminate those nations. According to the present Yakuza KGB FSB and international terrorist plans, their actions are expected to reduce the US to lying prostrate and helpless 2 years from now. With a US nation in utter chaos and ruin, and economically already collapsing catastrophically, a touch-up with the FSB KGB quantum potential weapons, the most powerful weapons on Earth, but possessed by at least 5 nations, will quickly dud every nuclear weapon, intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear bomber, nuclear power plant, nuclear submarine propulsion system, etc. on the planet. The dudding will take about 10 minutes, although an hour or so seems to be allotted for it. This is pulling the dragon's teeth and claws. The conventional strategic military power, intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear bombs and warheads, and nuclear subs etc., will be suddenly dudded and effectively wiped out, to exist no more. All that giant strategic apparatus will be just so much trash on the garbage dump of history. At that point, the Yakuza gleefully plan to participate in the methodical destruction of the United States. The terminal part of the operations phase. They will be freed to just blast away at will with their scalar interferometers, as they wish, to continue to the full destruction of the United States. The intention of this unholy war against us, by both the recognized terrorists and the Yakuza/Aum Shinrikyo, the Aum Shinrikyo is now known as Aleph, is to kill every American, and every Israeli also? Men, women, children, babies, all of us. We will see the operational unleashing of this terrible plan, beginning during the next 2 years, gradually increasing in intensity, and finishing in the early part of the 3rd year with the catastrophic economic collapse of the United States. Once the economic collapse is complete and the nation is in utter chaos, the sudden dudding of all our nuclear weapons, power plants, and nuclear propulsion systems will be the coup de grace that leaves us a hapless target. The rest of it is a turkey shoot, to simply execute us and finish us off. Summary and conclusion. In closing, we reiterate some massive strategic capabilities already registered and waiting. A few weeks ago, the Yakuza scalar interferometers registered, zeroed in, on the Yellowstone caldera, the largest supervolcano on this planet. With that registration completed, they now can initiate that supervolcano into violent eruption, whenever they wish. Again, the supervolcano's eruption will likely expel more ash, lava, debris, and rocks than the entire Grand Canyon can hold, devastating a large part of North America. The caldera is overdue for another eruption anyway, so undoubtedly there is increased geophysical stress there already. One should also check the latest findings in geology, and see what happened to North America the last time that Yellowstone caldera erupted violently. The last eruption devastated quite a portion of North America, killing most of the higher forms of life in a large area. Now check what happened the last time the somewhat smaller Toba supervolcano in Sumatra, Indonesia erupted violently, about 74,000 years ago. It destroyed all human life on Earth, except for some 10 to 20,000 humans in Africa. The human genetics shows this sudden bottleneck in our genetic variability that sudden occurred about 74,000 years ago. Also, this is why the present human genetics also shows that we all came from Africa. And so we did. We are all descendants of that small group left alive in Africa about 74,000 years ago. In registering on the Yellowstone caldera, the Yakuza has already achieved an additional tremendous knockout strategic strike capability against the United States. The Yakuza can indeed wipe out much of North America in a single strike, then finishing the destruction of the United States at its pleasure. There are of course other volcanoes in the US that can also be stimulated into eruption to add to the chaos and carnage. Remember, the US Secretary of Defense, Cohen, has already confirmed the use by terrorists of electromagnetic weapons for precisely such purpose. Initiating volcanoes, generating earthquakes, and controlling our weather and climate. The recent September 2004 shooting of one powerful hurricane after the other into the United States, is just one example. The economic damage done by those hurricanes Charlie, Francis, Ivan, etc. has been adequately covered on the national news, so it is already familiar to the reader. Other powerful capabilities available to the Yakuza scalar interferometers are also possible and therefore registered, such as deliberately generating tsunamis that then strike targeted coastal areas at jetliner speed. One such tsunami looking for just a touch to complete its preparations to happen is provided by the Cumbre Vija volcano in the Canary Islands. A large section of the volcano has already broken loose, and threatens to slide into the sea. If so, it will generate an enormous tidal wave, tsunami, that will strike the east coast of the United States a few hours later. For example, quoting Bill McGuire, director of the Benfield Grieg Hazard Research Centre at University College in London. A 12-mile chunk of the Cumbre Vija volcano in the Canary Islands rattled loose during a previous eruption and is at risk of smashing into the Atlantic Ocean, triggering what could be one of the largest tidal waves in recorded history. It's not a matter of if, but when. Obviously, if this submarine slump-induced tsunami is induced sharply by Yakuza scalar interferometry, so that the slump occurs with sufficient force, then 8 to 10 hours later a great tidal wave 70 feet or more in height could strike New York and the eastern U.S. coast, as well as the Caribbean, moving at some 600 miles per hour. Such a giant tsunami would penetrate inland and devastate entire coastal areas. It is an opportunity that will not have gone unnoticed by the Yakuza, and undoubtedly one or more scalar interferometers have already registered on that target. Again, we strongly point out SEC Def Cohen's confirmation of just such use of electromagnetic weapons by terrorists. This is one more example of what can be done by deliberately evoking, assisting, and directing already available giant geological forces. So weather engineering and steering and augmenting hurricanes and other storms is just one facet of the real threat. But it is a very important part of the strategic threat, as indicated by Secretary of Defense Cohen in 1997. Hostile Yakuza fingers are already on the triggers of those zeroed-in scalar electromagnetic interferometry weapons, 24/7, waiting for the order to be given to strike. If deemed necessary, this already includes the eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano and the massive tsunami hitting the eastern U.S. seaboard from induced violent eruption of the Cumber volcano. These two examples are the kind of things that, to one extent or another, are now coming down the pike at us full speed. We have also briefly pointed out the horrific casualties that can be obtained by very small and simple anthrax attacks, when bolstered by force amplifiers, immune system spreading and electromagnetic biological warfare disease induction. As can be seen, once the superweapons, such as scalar interferometers, already in the hands of the asymmetric warfare terrorists, the Yakuza component, are factored into the analysis, indeed the terrorists have already achieved a strange kind of rolling thunder strategic knockout capability against the United States. At least publicly, this major change in the capabilities of the terrorists against the United States has not been analyzed or pursued by the conventional U.S. government agencies and their traditional support analysis agencies. When the strategic strikes and force amplifiers are factored into the war with terrorism, we find that we now confront a den of raging but carefully controlled tigers, not just a den of small cats using car bombs and solitary humans with strapped-on C4 explosives. Instead, we confront a coordinated strategic threat of awesome power and tremendous damage capability, one that already has the capability to destroy us, and one that is slowly tightening the noose about our collective necks in a deliberate 3-year schedule for our total destruction.